"Calm him down," yelled a disgruntled lady on the train. The father's reply made the whole carload of. When Selena was just about to leave the house with her husband Harvey, someone rang the doorbell. She did not hurry to open the door, as she is in a hurry to visit family friends. Time is very short. She has to stop by to buy presents. It seemed that the unexpected guest was not going to leave. The calls became more insistent. Selena ran to the door, peered through the peephole, and exclaimed loudly, "Oh my God!" She hurried to open the door. In front of her stood her son Mickey. "Mom, I thought you weren't home." "Come in, son. Why are you like this?" "You should have warned me. Your father and I almost went to visit. Casey, come on in." "Mom, I'd like you to meet Casey, my wife. I told you about her. So we decided to surprise you and sign her ourselves." Mickey shocked his parents with his announcement. Selena thought for a moment, trying to remember when Mickey had talked about this Casey. He talked about a lot of girls, but Selena didn't remember much about Casey in particular. In front of her stood a short, full-figured girl with dyed hair and dark circles under her eyes. Selena wasn't particularly thrilled, but now was not the time to show it. "Harvey! Harvey, look who's here!" Selena escorted her son and her daughter-in-law into the living room. Harvey, who had already spent an hour in front of the mirror trying to tie his tie, was overjoyed to see his son. "That's news. Mother, our son has a knack for surprises. If he'd been half an hour late, we'd have had to stand at the door until evening." "How are you, my son? Welcome home." Harvey greeted his son warmly, then looked questioningly at Casey, who was a little embarrassed, and said hello. "It's Walker's anniversary today. My mother and I are going to see them. Are you coming with us, or are you going to stay home and rest?" Harvey asked. "No, Dad. You go and have fun, and we'll get some rest," Casey said Mickey. "Well, as you wish. The main thing is not to be bored here without us," said Selena and hurried her husband. As soon as the married couple left the apartment and the door closed behind them, Selena said to her husband, "Have you seen, what's going on? Who the hell is this Casey girl? He says he told me about her, and I don't remember anything. But I don't like that girl. She don't even look like Mickey. Look at him. He's handsome, well-mannered, and this girl doesn't impress me." Selena started to grumble. "Mother, stop it. Mickey's a big boy. He can decide what he wants to do with his life. What's it to you and me? Let him live his life. Let him make his own choices. A girl's just a girl to me. I'm talking about you," Harvey said and laughed. As the celebration at Walker's was drawing to a close, a tipsy Harvey made a toast. "It was a good holiday today. I want to continue it. You, Maria, and Alexander are celebrating 30 years of life together, and on the same day, we learned that a new cell of society has appeared in our circle. To be more precise, our Mickey brought a bride into the house. So in a week's time, we'll be expecting the same group of people at our house. Congratulations and wishes in honor of Maria and Alexander smoothly flowed to Selena and Harvey. The guests gladly accepted the proposal to celebrate the marriage of Mickey and Casey in a week in a small circle of friends. The next day, Selena's family had a closer encounter with Casey. Selena kept trying to convince herself that her vague doubts about Casey's unworthiness of her son were just her usual maternal reaction. She'd asked a lot of questions of Casey and was convinced that she was a typical girl, not a bad character, and Harvey had reassured her. A week later, the family was ready to welcome guests to the restaurant. Family friends were toasting and presenting their gifts. Mickey sat quietly in the corner of the table accepting congratulations, while Casey was off and back again. As the event neared the halfway point, Selena noticed that Casey was becoming quite talkative, and after a while, she let go of controlling her behavior. Now she was bravely telling obscene jokes and drinking with her father-in-law's friends. When Selena tried to admonish her, Harvey gestured that it was okay. Let them have fun. So what if she had a little too much to drink amidst the excitement, said Harvey. amidst the excitement, and Cindy and Natalie will be saying tomorrow that Mickey brought some alcoholic into the house, and they'll be right. A girl's got to know how to behave in public. I don't think anyone taught that girl how to behave in public, Selena hissed. When the guests were leaving, Casey couldn't stand on her own. Mickey tried to take her home as fast as he could, but she resented him for some reason and made her own complaints. All of this was happening in front of her parents. Selena could barely contain her emotions. The next day, Selena got up early as usual to make breakfast for the whole family. She went to the refrigerator, clearly unable to say hello to her mother-in-law, opened the door, found nothing for her hangover, and closed it again with a clatter. "Casey, is something wrong?" Selena tried to break the uneasy silence. "I don't feel well. Where's the store around here?" she asked, and Selena could smell the sharp odor of booze in her face. "The store is in the courtyard, on the first floor of this house," answered the mother-in-law. "You should have known better, and it's not proper to get drunk in front of guests," she added. But Casey didn't hear these words, because she had already left the door of the apartment, leaving it open. A few minutes later, while the pancakes were frying, Selena watched from the kitchen window as Casey came out of the store with a bottle of beer in her hands, sat on a bench in the yard, and smoked. As the next pancakes were being fried, she saw Harry, the neighbor's idle and drunken son, sit down next to Casey on the bench, and they began to chat animatedly. At the same time, another family was facing the dilemma of a daughter-in-law. The Weasley Seven's son John recently finished his studies at a prestigious university and got a job right away as an executive. John's mother, Nalari, had long dreamed of his wedding, so she began to rush with renewed vigor to get her son engaged in his personal life. Her son had no problems with his personal life. John has been dating Julia for a long time. They know each other well and do not imagine their lives apart. Therefore, John, not thinking long, offered Julia to move in with him. He promised that soon they would go to his parents in his native land. He would introduce them to them, and at the same time, they would determine the date of the wedding. When John arrived home with Julia, Nunnery too looked on with great bewilderment. "John, what about Angelica? She loves you so much. She's been waiting for your attention for a long time. It's a fine family, decent people, and they've known you since you were a child," said Mallory to John while Julia was in the kitchen. "Mom, Angelica and I are just friends. She's nice, she's beautiful, but nothing can happen between us. Julia and I have been dating for 5 years. I can't imagine my life without her. I'm sure you'll like her very soon too," John said. "John, we're not the kind of people who can let our feelings get in the way of sentimentality. You should have realized that my father and I are in business for life, and it's going to be in your hands soon. For this system to work as it has in the past, we need reliable connections in the government. Your father has served his time in the civil service. He's about to retire, and he'll probably be replaced by Frank, Angelica's father. Close ties with that family would guarantee our position, of course, and your welfare above all. That's why Angelica is the best match for you," Mallory continued to insist. "Mom, my well-being depends only on me. I've got a good education, I have a good job, and I can achieve everything without sacrificing my happiness. If you want Frank, then be friends with him directly, without sacrificing the fate of your children. I'm sure Angelica probably feels the same way," John said. Then Mallory went back into the kitchen and looked at Julia setting the table so diligently. That girl is a good-looking girl. She had definitely received a good upbringing from her parents. She knew how to behave in public. She was polite and caring. A little later, she decided to discuss it with her husband Jacob. Jacob is a man with a lot of life experience and understanding of the realities of life. His many years of experience in leadership positions have helped him to become an insightful person. "Jacob, you should talk to your son. Why feed a girl false hope? She's probably already fantasizing about marriage and a future with him," It's time to let her know that's not gonna happen. John has a purpose in life, and that purpose is to further our cause, and he needs to do everything he can to fulfill that purpose, including getting close to Frank, Valentina said. What does he say? Jacob asked. What? He says he loves this Julia, that he's going to make a career for himself on his own so Frank and I can find another way to keep in touch and other selfishness. He's young. He doesn't understand a lot of things in life. He doesn't know how to deal with reality. He won't listen to us anyway, Jacob said blankly. So if we don't stop him, he'll do whatever he wants because he's young. That's why I'm telling you to talk to him. Otherwise I'll talk to Julia myself, and things will be much tougher, said Mallory. Mother, don't you dare upset the young ones. Why would you do that? She's someone else's child too, and I'll talk to my son. Jacob reassured her. The doorbell rang, and Cecilia, the Weasley Seven's youngest daughter, ran to open it. She looked through the peephole and shouted toward her parents, "It's Lenka." Jacob and Mallory looked at each other in silence. Angelica will be surprised to see Julia so diligently setting the table in the kitchen. Angelica is Frank's only daughter. She and John went to the same daycare, went to the same school. She's always liked John. Even after Angelica studied abroad for 5 years and returned, she still has warm feelings for John. Angelica, you're just in time. We're having a family dinner, Cecilia said and smiled enigmatically. Jacob, Mallory, hello. Dad says hi. Angelica was standing on the living room doorstep the next second, smiling her radiant smile. Hello, Angelica. Health to your parents, she heard back from John's parents. Thank you, Mallory. I heard that Oleshka came from the city. Angelica smiled enigmatically. Angelica and I will sit on the balcony. Cecilia adequately assessed the situation and tried to take Angelica away to gently prepare her to meet the new member of the family. Angelica and Cecilia were like two sisters, so when John brought Julia to the house, Cecilia was immediately worried about Angelica. She thoughtfully called Angelica and told her that John had arrived. Cecilia hurried to meet Angelica herself first, to bring her up to date with the news and prepare her before she met John. Angelica, how long have you been in touch with John? Cecilia asked. A long time ago, you might say. Lately, I hadn't been able to get in touch with him. Either he was busy, or he wasn't in the mood. I decided not to insist on communication. I decided to wait for him to come, and then I could communicate with him in person. Angelica said, not suspecting anything yet. Well, in that case, I can explain his behavior to you. He got a girlfriend. They decided to get married. He brought her to us. She's at our house now, Cecilia said. What did your parents say? Angelica asked. Mom's against it, of course. Dad hasn't spoken up yet. But believe me, his parents won't let him marry that girl. And John himself has only ever favored you. That girl from the village wanted a beautiful life and probably just turned his head, Cecilia said. But John's a grown man anyway. I wouldn't want to have a relationship with him, knowing that he intended to marry someone else. If he decides to choose her, so be it, Angelica said. Are you crazy? Don't be so naive. You realize that John is every girl's dream, and you're one of them. If you give up, there's a good chance you'll meet some strange man with strange intentions. These hunters for women's hearts are usually very skillful, will tell you about high feelings and selfless love. They themselves will only have in mind your money and connections. I can see that in John's girlfriend. She gets up bright and early every day and tries to please every member of our family. It's understandable that she has a lot of interests, and you're just gonna put your hands down and say, whatever John decides, that's what happens. John can decide with this upstart, not with reality, Cecilia said. What do you suggest? Do you want me to fight for him? Angelica asked. Fighting or helping John make smart choices can be called many things, but you should consider that our whole family is on your side, Your whole family is on your side. Our parents and yours will only be happy about your marriage, and you both benefit from it. You think, with those initial conditions, it's possible to try, don't you? Cecilia challenged Angelique. Angelica stared thoughtfully out the window and pondered Cecilia's words. Cecilia realized she was going in the right direction and continued her speech. This plan means you won't have to work too hard. I don't know how long John and his girlfriend will be here, but Mom and I will figure something out. All you have to do is wait for our signals and proceed as instructed. Our goal is to sow discord between John and this girl, and every time he feels bad about the conflict, you will appear as an understanding friend. We'll take it from there, Cecilia said in a businesslike tone. Well, if you're willing to help me, I'm gonna try to compete for John. To be honest, I still like him. Hoping for his attention, I've rejected a lot of people. There must be some logic to it, right? Now Angelica was starting to convince herself. Julia had almost set the table in the kitchen and was waiting for her fiance's family, not realizing what events awaited her in her life with John. Jacob talked to John the next day, of course, but he made it clear that he had already decided to be with Julia, and it was useless to dissuade him. As for the rationality of getting closer to Frank's family, John advised that it would be better to marry Cecilia to their wayward son, which, of course, Mallory and Jacob would never agree to. What parents would want to marry off their daughter to an unreliable young man? And is it acceptable to play with the fate of someone else's daughter, who has crystal clear intentions of starting a family and continuing the family lineage? This is a question not usually asked in the families of grooms. A few days later, Cecilia was sitting on the balcony of their huge mansion, looking at something on her phone while chatting with one of her friends. When she was done, she went down to the kitchen on the first floor. Here Julia was diligently preparing something for dinner. Oh, it smells so good. How lucky John is to have a wife. She's beautiful and caring, and she cooks deliciously, Cecilia said with a wide smile. Julia had no idea about the family arguments surrounding her marriage to John within the Weasley family. None of the family members had given any indication that she wasn't welcome here, and they would soon begin to actively set about eliminating her. But she had taken Mallory's somewhat cold attitude as the norm. I've heard that mothers are often jealous of their sons of their daughters-in-law. Yet she has had full ownership of her son for 27 years, and now I share that attention with her. Maybe she's not used to sharing her son with me yet, but that's okay. I'll find my way to her heart. She is the woman who gave birth to and raised the man of my dreams. I'll always show her the respect she deserves, no matter how she treats me. Julia thought to herself and set herself up for the best. Cecilia did not show her true attitude in any way. She treated Julia with the utmost courtesy and complimented her. When they were alone together, though, Cecilia was free to be sarcastic and caustic about Julia's background. She was the daughter of ordinary people, not of officials like John and Cecilia. But Julia's mother tried to raise her to be a decent person, so she judges everyone by herself. So when Cecilia allows you to make barbed remarks, Julia ignores them. In this way, she convinces herself that she holds the bar high in her behavior. This is a common misconception of many women, not considering the fact that others may perceive it as a weakness. I admire how divine your baked goods are. Cecilia gave Julia a fat dose of flattery. Yeah, I love working with pastry. This pie with curd and lemon. Do you want a slice? It's really hot off the presses. Julia was genuinely pleased at the attention. No thanks. I don't eat sweets. All flour and sweets are poor people's food because they are low quality and cheap. And I advise you not to eat too much of it, or you'll get fat like the village women, Cecilia said, and continued to look at Julia with a smirk. Julia was taken aback by this unexpected barb. While she was considering what to say to Cecilia, or whether she should answer at all, she asked, John, when's he coming? You didn't call him. No, she hasn't called. I think she'll be here soon," Julia said after Cecilia, who had already left the kitchen. All of Julia's euphoria over the flavorful pie had turned into an unpleasant residue. Cecilia's got a talent for it. To compliment and thereby emphasize one's belonging to the world of the chosen ones is still a skill. John arrived just in time for dinner. Cecilia met him at the entrance and held her smartphone screen up to his face. "Look, this bracelet from a very famous brand just went on sale 2 weeks ago. My mum showed it to me, she really liked it. Let's give her a present and split the money and buy her this bracelet. What do you say?" Cecilia asked her brother. "What's the occasion?" John asked. "What do you need an excuse to make your mom feel good? Can't you just surprise her? How hard can it be?" Cecilia began to subtly press her brother. "Come on, surprise, surprise. How much is it?" "I'll give you the amount. You buy it yourself." "Okay." "Oh, okay. That'll be $500. Mine's ready," Cecilia said. John pulled out his cell phone, made a couple of clicks on the screen, and told his sister, "I put it on your card. Don't forget to tell Mom it's from both of us. I want to see her happy too," John said one last time. A couple of days later at dinner, Cecilia stood up and ceremoniously handed the branded bracelet to her mother. She was surprised at the unexpected gift, but the children convinced her that it was normal to make pleasant surprises without an occasion. Mallory accepted the children's gift with great joy. At the family dinner, Cecilia announced that Angelica was having a small party tonight, and she was invited. Her parents didn't wait for Cecilia's request to let her go, but suggested that she go to Frank's house and join the party. Cecily emphasized that if it was late, she would stay there overnight. She repeated to each member of the family not to expect her for the night and to go to bed. At midnight, when all the family members were already fast asleep, Cecilia quietly opened all the doors of the house with her key and made her way to her mother's room on the chains. She knows very well where her mother keeps her precious jewelry. As one would expect, the newly gifted brand name bracelet was also in that place. Cecilia took the jewelry box and also on the chains made her way to the dressing room where Julia keeps her things. Then she also quietly closed all the doors behind her with her keys and went to continue the festivities. When Cecilia returned to her home in the morning, Mallory had already discovered the missing items and sat in confusion. When she saw Cecilia, she told her that she had lost the bracelet she had given her yesterday. Cecilia was not confused. "Julia, have you seen Mom's bracelet we gave her yesterday?" Julia ran out of the kitchen, where she was washing dishes, and answered, "No, I haven't." "It's a shame, Mallory. Maybe you put it somewhere and forgot about it," Julia said. "I vividly remember trying it on in front of the mirror in my powder room and putting it back in its box. I even remember I was going to wear it to work today and brag to everyone that the kids gave it to me," Mallory said. "Mom, let's take another good look in your room. How can anything be missing from the house if no one has touched it?" Cecilia said and led her mother to the second floor. There Cecilia pretended to look for the lost bracelet for a while. The voice inside her told Julia that something dangerous was going on around her. She decided to push the unpleasant thoughts away and remembered to go to the supermarket and get some groceries. While her mother-in-law and her daughter were on the second floor, she took her bag from the dressing room and headed for the exit. "Julia, wait!" She was stopped by the imperious voice of Cecily, who was coming down from the second floor. "I looked in my mom's room, and it's really not there. It couldn't have disappeared into nowhere. It could have ended up in another woman's hands. I was out last night. Mom was asleep, which means the other woman is you. Where is the bracelet?" Cecilia asked threateningly. "How could you think that about me? I didn't even touch the bracelet." Julia was even more confused. Cecilia said, then walked over to Julia, quickly grabbed her bag out of her hands, and turned it upside down. The entire contents of the bag scattered to the floor. The bracelet box fell at Mallory's feet. "July, stealing is wrong. If John finds out, He'll be very upset. You could just ask him to give you one too. Cecilia continued in an admonishing tone. This is some kind of mistake. This is a setup. I never even thought about stealing anything from Mallory. Julia only now realized how difficult it would be for her to prove her innocence to these people, and she was horrified. As Cecilia continued to talk, Julia sprinted out the door and headed for the bench outside. She immediately called and told John everything. He promised to take care of it tonight and asked her to wait for him. At that moment, Cecilia dialed Angelica's number to delight her with the news. Angelica, get ready. John and his girlfriend are going to have some serious problems tonight. You need to call and prove yourself a loyal friend. Make John want to spend the rest of the evening with you. Invite him out. He'll definitely go out tonight, Cecilia said and hung up. Mallory didn't pay much attention to who her daughter was whispering to on the balcony. She was completely immersed in her own emotions and only repeated to herself that she knew this girl would not bring good to the family. In the evening, there was a real showdown. Julia cried, swearing by all the saints that she had touched nothing. Cecilia, on the other hand, was unwavering in her accusations. Mallory sided with her daughter. Only Jacob realized that there seemed to be two separate factions within the family, and one of them had declared war on the other today. John realized it too. So when Angelica called him and asked him to spend the evening together in a languid voice, he briefly rejected all her offers and turned to Julia. We need to talk in private. Mom will be late. You and Cecilia try to calm down and forget all the talk of the day, John said. He took Julia to the nearest cafe, and they discussed what had happened for a long time. John drew the right conclusions and decided to act immediately. Meanwhile, another family had their own dramas going on. Selena came home from work early so she could make dinner for the whole family. She already knows it's useless to ask her sister-in-law Cassie to do this. Even though she stays at home and doesn't work anywhere, Cassie will find 1,000 excuses to dodge any housework. Opening the door with her key, she was surprised to see unfamiliar shoes in the passage. And from the kitchen came cheerful voices. She walked into the kitchen and saw the neighbor's son Harry. As befitted Harry's usual lifestyle, there were cans of beer and some kind of snacks from bags on the table. What's going on here? Casey, did you bring him into the house? Selena asked. Hello, neighbor. I was just stopping by for tea. Peace out, Harry said, leaning back in his chair. Casey wasn't in the kitchen. She'd raised her voice from the living room. Yes, the neighbor from the stairwell came by to say hello. Casey rushed to explain everything to her mother-in-law. Okay, Harry, we're not being very hospitable here. You please go home, and Casey and I have chores to do, Selena said. Everything is as the mistress says it will be. I'm leaving for sure. Ulek, you're great. Come over to my place too. We'll have a beer and play some dungeons, Harry said and walked slowly towards the exit. As soon as the door closed behind Seryoga, Selena took Casey by the elbow and said menacingly, Are you out of your mind? How many times have I seen you messing around with that bum in the yard? And I kept quiet, thinking you knew what you were doing. Why the hell are you bringing strange men into the house when my son isn't here? And why is it a neighbor? Didn't you think it's abnormal to bring an ex-con into the house? A convict? I didn't know that. Casey still didn't understand her mother-in-law's reaction. And he told me he was in the army on contract, she continued. Selena could smell the acrid odor of alcohol from Casey. Woe is me, woe is me. An educated, well-mannered son brought into the house of an obscure girl. She is here all the alcoholics from the neighborhood, and she drinks with them at the same time. Why do I have to go through this ordeal? Selena clutched her heart. So he's your neighbor. He asked to come to your house. How was I supposed to know he was a convict? Your son loves me, and you're just jealous. That's why you don't let us live in peace. I'll tell him everything, said Casey. She's always so brave when she's drunk. and she drank a lot, as Mickey's parents had noticed. By this time, Selena had already dialed her husband's number and was telling him what she thought about Casey for the umpteenth time. Harvey seemed to want to avoid quarrels in the family as always and tried to calm down his wife. She couldn't stand it and almost became hysterical. She carries our grandson in her belly, drinks alcohol every single day, and is always hanging out with our neighbors. Now I have big doubts whether our grandson is in her belly. Talk to my son and tell him to deal with her immediately. Otherwise, I'll have to kick her out of the door myself. Casey heard those words and got turned on too. Oh, so you did tell me that we got married in wedlock. I knew it was a red flag to any mother-in-law. She mumbled to herself and dialed Mickey's number. But that was just one episode in the life of Mickey's family. Ever since Casey arrived in the house, scandals have become a regular occurrence. He and his father barely have time to calm their women down. Mickey realized that Casey really doesn't show herself as a woman. She can't cook. She's not used to keeping her house clean. She doesn't want to work anywhere because she thinks that everyone is cheating and underpaying her. He found out about all this too late. By that time, Casey was already pregnant and demanded from Mickey to take responsibility for her and for the future child. Mickey, like a decent man, agreed to all of Casey's demands. Selena, on the other hand, couldn't accept it. She hoped to see an educated and well-mannered girl as her son's life partner. Well, at least a girl without bad habits and without the tendency to start conversations with every man in the yard. But where to go now, when soon a grandson or granddaughter will be born? Selena only prayed that a healthy child would be born. Unfortunately, Casey's lifestyle didn't predispose her to that. No matter how much Selena talks about the harmfulness of beer, energy drinks, and quick snacks from bags, Casey immediately complains to Mickey that her mother is jealous and does not give her life. After the incident with the missing bracelet, John talks to his father and makes the right decision. He and Julia are not going to live peacefully in the same house with Cecilia and his mother. John rented an apartment and moved Julia there. The wedding was also decided not to postpone for later. However, both were very worried because the opponents of this wedding turned out to be enough, and it is not known what they can still throw out on this day. The news that John and Julia had planned a wedding for next month puzzled Cecilia and Angelica. Angelica was sure that Cecilia would definitely think of something to keep the wedding from happening. But when they heard the date of the wedding, they decided not to give up. There was still plenty of time. If they couldn't upset the wedding, they could organize something special right on the day of the wedding, so that the marriage wouldn't last long. This idea encouraged Cecilia, and she decided to go ahead. John and Julia decided to hold the wedding modestly and for a small circle of the closest people. They booked a restaurant and distributed invitations to all the guests. On the appointed day, Julia excitedly prepared for the most important event in her life. Her parents arrived in advance, but John's parents didn't want to meet and get to know them beforehand. "I'll see you at the wedding. I don't have time for you now," Mallory replied briefly to the introduction. John and Julia didn't pay much attention to the relationship between their parents that wasn't working out and were looking forward to the best. Angelica and Cecilia had bought fancy dresses for the occasion. But that was not all their preparations. The main surprise required more preparation and more effort. They even had to pay for it. They did not stand for the price. The long-awaited day came. The wedding was in full swing. The guests made toasts, congratulated the newlyweds, and had fun. The parents did not particularly seek each other's company, and each of them sat in the circle of their loved ones. As the evening approached its midpoint, Cecilia stepped out to make sure her plan was ready. After a long musical intermission, the guests went to their tables. An unfamiliar, beautiful girl entered the room and drew the attention of all the guests to herself. Because she was wearing a wedding dress, the guests thought for a moment that they were imagining it. But Julia was still sitting next to John, and it was some other bride. John, on the other hand, turned white when he saw the girl in the wedding dress. The stranger in the wedding dress discreetly took the microphone from the Toastmasters table and began her prepared speech. "John, you're probably wondering why I'm wearing a wedding dress today. I think you remember the date exactly 4 years ago today. Long before that day, you told me that you dreamed of seeing me next to you in a white dress. Then you and I decided to realize our dream and secretly got married." The guests sobered up instantly and began to murmur among themselves. The parents looked at the girl with the microphone and John in total confusion. John stood there like a stumbling block, unable to think or say anything. At that moment, a video about the love story of John and this mysterious girl in a wedding dress started on the huge screen in the restaurant's festive hall. Yes, indeed, in the frames John shines in the image of a happy groom who is languidly waiting to meet his bride with a bouquet in his hands. In the next shots, this strange girl is spinning at the mirror and puts the finishing touches on the image of the bride. The beautiful shots are accompanied by a romantic song. The girl asked for the audience's attention and continued her speech. "And then you walked away, leaving me and my daughter. You betrayed our love, but I decided never to betray it. That's why I still wear my wedding ring." The girl raised her right hand and showed her ring finger with her wedding ring to the audience. She then continued her speech. "You told me that fate may separate us, but you will always live in my heart as my first and only love. I decided to live the rest of my life by those words. That's why I tell our daughter that Daddy will come back to the family someday and we will be happy again, as we were on this day exactly 4 years ago. John, I see now that you have decided to start a new page in your life. However long your marriage to Julia lasts, may it be a happy one. But I know for a fact that you and I will be together again. I believe that our daughter you will definitely not leave without attention and affection," the girl continued to say. The bewildered Toastmaster stood next to the girl and persuaded her to give up the microphone. But the girl deftly dodged him and walked around the hall. He finally caught up with her and almost forcibly turned off the microphone. The girl finally shouted something in the direction of the newlyweds and left the room. But the love story continued on the screen. Julia almost fainted from what she had seen and heard. Accompanied by her friend, she went to the ladies' room, barely restraining her tears and emotions. The festive mood of the guests vanished in an instant. Jacob, who was almost impossible to get out of his mind, shook his head and sat with his hands over his face. Julia's parents started looking for their daughter to comfort her. They were even ready to take her away from here forever if she wanted to. John's friends said something indignant to him, but he heard nothing. In his head, there was only one thought: to take the microphone from the Toastmaster and all the guests to say the names of those who came up with this cynical number. But it was too late. The guests got into several groups and hurriedly left the hall to give time to the heroes of today to sort out among themselves. Who knows, maybe the showdown would result in the wedding being cancelled. John got up from his seat and headed after Julia. He found her in the ladies' room. John was sure she was probably sobbing or hysterical by now, but it seemed he still underestimated her. "John, do you know this girl?" Julia asked. She was a little dejected, but she was in control and seemed to understand where the wind was coming from. "This is the first time I've ever seen her. In fact, I don't understand what kind of show this is. I've never dressed up as a groom before, and this is the first time I've ever done it, believe me. It's some kind of a setup, and I'll take care of it. It's only a matter of 2 minutes," said John. "Yes, I'd like to believe that version too. But how do we save the situation?" Julia asked. "The only people left in the audience are parents and friends. We'll continue with them. I'll take the microphone myself now and comment briefly, and that's it," John said. Everyone's mood was ruined. Only Angelica and Cecilia were sitting in the car in the restaurant parking lot, waiting with great curiosity to see how Julia would behave next. At that moment, someone knocked on the window of their car. Cecilia saw a hired actress from a local club who had played the role of the jilted bride brilliantly. She was waiting for the rest of her fee. The guests were so dumbfounded by what was happening that no one even paid attention to the fact that the strange bride, leaving the restaurant, got into the car of the acting troupe with large inscriptions and logo. She during this time managed to calmly change her clothes, disband her hair and put on glasses, so that no one even accidentally did not recognize her. The actress took the money, gave her accomplices their shares in the car, and the troupe left. "I'd never dreamed of such a weird wedding," Julia said, finally reaching the apartment. "I'll start looking into who's behind this tomorrow. I think the event organizers and maybe the restaurant staff are involved. They're not going to get away with this," John said. "Yes, this is a case where exposure is a must," Julia added. "What did your parents say?" "They're the most embarrassed of all. And mine didn't give them a very warm welcome," John said. "Well, my mom is aware that I have become the classic unloved daughter-in-law to my mother-in-law. I warned them that there might be all sorts of surprises, but I don't think they were ready for just such a surprise." Julia even smiled a little. John looked at her smile and felt immense gratitude for her trust and faith in him. It was only Julia's calmness and judgment that had saved the day. Although she had lost her temper at first, she was able to pull herself together quickly and not let the insidious plans of her detractors come to fruition. After the wedding, Angelica and Cecilia waited several days for news from the newlyweds. But there was no news. Angelica realized that it was pointless to keep fighting for John. Only Cecilia was not going to give up. She had a good reason. Cecilia works as a financial director for her mother. Mallory is about to take a well-deserved vacation. Of course, she's grooming her daughter to take her place. But for Mallory's business to continue to thrive from steady government contracts, someone in the family is bound to be in a position of power. Jacob, who has served as first deputy governor for more than 20 years, is about to take a well-deserved vacation. And that could mean the state contracts could go away and Mallory's firm could go out of business. Frakes had his eye on the job for a long time, and he's made no secret of it. And Jacob sees him as a worthy heir to his chair. In order for the scheme to continue to feed all those who have long been accustomed to the trough, there must be a very close cohesion between these people. Cecilia understood this very well. Therefore, she spared no money, time and energy to get rid of Julia and set up her brother John with the only daughter of Frank's family. But Julia turned out to be a tough nut to crack. During the next week after the wedding, John had no trouble figuring out how the strange girl got into the restaurant and how she got the dubious love story video broadcast. The restaurant staff, under pressure from John's friends in law enforcement, quickly admitted that some people came and made their own changes to the wedding program. They did not elaborate on what the specific changes were. That was their mistake. And none of them knew the actress. John found that actress through social media. When she was brought to the police station, she refused to talk. While the police officers were trying to get some information, they got a call from above asking them to release the actress immediately. John was pleased with the fact that it was possible to prove to everyone that it was an order number. And the identities of the people who invented and ordered all this noise were no longer so important. Well, I'll find out. They'll tell me it's my own sister Cecilia and her friend Angelica. Maybe even my mother knows. Who's going to feel better? I'd already know they're always plotting against Julia and our marriage. In time they will get tired of it and stop these cheap tricks. John explained his version to his friends. The friends did not insist on continuing the investigation. They were more worried about Julia and her reaction. When John told them that she was very calm and reasonable, the friends were very surprised and noted that John had really met a worthy woman. John himself knew this, and now he was quietly proud of it. Since the birth of her grandson Frederick, Selena has been forced to live on two homes. Between family and business, she makes sure to find time to drop in on Casey and Mickey. Casey continues to resent this, believing that mother-in-law interferes in her life. In fact, Casey has, as one might assume, become a worthless mother. She has absolutely no maternal feelings for her child. She is still drawn to the streets, where she can drink with someone or just disappear for long periods of time. That's when the child is left alone. Selena hopes to get her grandson into a kindergarten soon, and then she will feel better for him. But for now, the kindergarten refuses to accept him, as little Frederick is severely delayed in development. Today, Selena decided to visit her son's family again. She opened the door with her key. In the hallway, she saw the shoes of little Frederick and realized that the child was home alone again. The first thing she did was look in the children's room. Frederick is not here, and it is not by chance. He doesn't like to sit here. Usually, little Frederick likes to mess around either in the bathroom or in the kitchen. Selena hurried into the kitchen. The kitchen door was closed for some reason. Selena opened it, and at the same moment, her heart leaped into her heels. In front of the open windows of the kitchen balcony stands Frederick's plastic toy table, and on the table is his stool. Frederick himself stands on this stool and almost jumps out of the window, trying to scare away the pigeons that are crowding the window. Seeing her grandson in such a precarious position, Celine cried out his name. Frederick turned around and saw his grandmother running toward him. The child thought it was just a normal game. Many children think if someone is running towards them, they will catch up soon, hence the need to run. As Selena covered the distance between the kitchen door and the window in a few steps, Frederick managed to sneak onto the windowsill. He wasn't looking into the abyss where he wanted to take a step. He was looking at his dazed grandmother, and he was indescribably amused by it. Frederick was saved from the last fatal step by the deft movement of the grandmother when she was able to grasp Frederick with both hands. Selena lifted her grandson off the windowsill and carried him into the living room. Little Frederick still didn't understand what could have happened and continued to laugh, considering himself in the game. She dialed Casey's number. The latter didn't answer right away. As soon as Casey picked up, Selena almost shouted at her, "Where the hell are you? What kind of mother are you?" A child almost fell out of the window. "Selena, who asked you to come to us anytime you want? I can manage my child just fine without your help. I just went to the store for a few minutes," Casey said. Casey seems to be completely incapable of understanding the meaning of words and the consequences of various rash actions. Selena realized that a long time ago, and she's been trying to get it out to Mickey. But what's the use? By the way, does Mickey even know what's going on in the house while he's away? She dialed Mickey's number and told him what tragedy had been avoided a few minutes ago. "Mickey, this isn't a joke anymore. Your Casey's not likely to ever grow up and realize her responsibilities in life. But we're risking Frederick's safety and his life for her. Please don't ruin your life with her. Try to get rid of her. I can raise my grandson myself. It's better for him. And at least you'll have a chance to meet a decent woman," Selena said. She didn't notice that by then Casey was already in the apartment and had overheard the whole conversation. As soon as Selena hung up the phone, Casey burst into the living room and tried to snatch Frederick out of her grandmother's arms. As she did so, she was loudly resentful. "You still haven't gotten over your jealousy. You're even willing to divorce Mickey and me over it. You've been giving us a hard time since the beginning. We separated from you to save our family, but you keep interfering with it even from a distance," Casey said. "Otherwise, you'd still want to drink with the first man you meet, loiter and parasitize my son. You're hiding behind my son to continue your promiscuous lifestyle. You can't even realize that by doing so, you are sacrificing your child." Selena once again tries to get through to Casey, but in vain. There were many such conversations and incidents in this family's life, but they were useless to Casey. This time, after Selena threatened to take Frederick back to her place, Casey was afraid that she might push Mickey toward divorce. Without thinking long, she made a decision that would help keep Mickey in her life. A couple of months later, she was able to successfully implement her plan. The pregnancy test showed 2 stripes. Casey was confident that Mickey would not abandon a pregnant woman and then a woman with 2 children, and Selena would hardly dare to take on the responsibility of 2 small children at once at her advanced age. Casey was delighted with her resourceful decision and looked forward to the birth of her second baby girl. However, nothing had changed in her lifestyle. Parallel to these events, there were also changes in John's life with Julia. After the unpleasant surprise at the wedding, they didn't communicate with John's loved ones for a long time. During this time, they learned from the news that Jacob Wesley had left his post and Frank had taken his place. Surely, the question of removing Julia from John's life had become even more pressing for this family. But John and Julia decided to arrange their lives as they saw fit. John successfully built his career, succeeding at every step he took. Julia also worked until the birth of their daughter, Eva. Eva is now 3 years old. She makes her parents happy every minute and gives them endless happiness. Julia was thinking about going back to work these days. John was against it. "Julia, I don't want our Eva to have the stress of adjusting to daycare. She's such a homebody. In a couple of years, she'll want to be around other kids. Then you can think about work. Right now, I'm still willing to work day and night so that you and your daughter don't need anything," John said. "But I'm already bored sitting at home." Julia stretched lazily. Carrying a child under your heart, giving birth to it, and raising it is a huge labor. It's just something society has come to take for granted. I don't want to be so consumeristic with you. You need to rest and recuperate, and then you can think about work, if you think it would be good for you," John said. Such words sounded very convincing to Julia. She continued to enjoy motherhood and lovingly cared for Eva. It was a pity, though, that Eva had not yet been seen by her grandparents. They would have loved her for sure, and maybe they could forget old conflicts and finally recognize Julia's right to be near John. One cozy family evening, John called to say he wasn't expected for dinner tonight. This has happened to him often since he became an executive. Julia is very understanding. If she can't make it in time for dinner, she'll come back later. She and her daughter have a great time and are not affected by John's busy schedule. After a while, John said that soon there will be a corporate party in the company and everyone should come with their other halves. Julia happily agreed, as she had not known any of John's colleagues until then. John's team turned out to be really united and cheerful. The guests were having fun, singing and dancing. At some point, Julia decided to go to the ladies' room. She had not noticed until then that some of the guests had been watching her closely since the beginning of the evening, waiting for a more private moment with her. Following Julia out of the room was this mysterious man. As Julia stood in front of the restroom mirror fixing her hair, the mystery man dared to approach her, and it was a woman of great beauty, statuesque and haughty. "Hi, what's your name?" the lady asked. "I'm Julia. My spouse works in this company as a CFO," Julia said proudly. "I know him," the lady smiled enigmatically. The lady didn't say anything else and just watched Julia's every move with a smile. If at first she had thought that one of John's colleagues had decided to meet her just for the sake of politeness, now she was a little confused. The lady seemed to be following her purposefully. "How long have you and John been together?" the lady asked. 5 years in total, 4 of which we've been married. We have a wonderful daughter." Julia tried not to give away her doubts and keep her composure. "A little early," said the lady and smiled even wider. "What's a little early?" Julia asked. "It's a little early for him to start cheating on you, honey. Maybe it's for the best, and it'll be easier for you to find your man." She began to fix her hair thoughtfully. "What are you trying to say?" "It's okay. John loves me, I love him too. You gave birth to a daughter. I can give him a son. Just keep that in mind. The sooner you realize that I'll win, the easier it will be for you, the lady said, looking straight into Julia's eyes. Julia had an immediate sense of déjà vu. Throughout her life with John, how many times had she heard such threats? She couldn't count them all. As a rule, it was usually someone close to John who was behind them. Julia was glad that this time she hadn't given in to her emotions and had figured out what was going on almost immediately. On the way home, John asked about Julia's impressions of his co-workers. She shared all the positive aspects of the evening, but a strange lady came up to me and tried to tell on you. But I'm an old-timer, and I know that intrigue against our family can be found anywhere, so I didn't argue with the lady. And by the way, I didn't even ask her name, Julia said, looking at her husband. John didn't comment on this, but drove on in silence. It was as if a whirlwind of emotion had started inside him, and he was trying to hide it carefully. Julia thought that John, too, had long since had enough of these cheap tricks, and that was why he was reacting in such a way. At this point, this incident was forgotten. After the birth of the second child, Casey was much less worried about her marriage to Mickey. Her position in the family is now stronger. Mickey loves his son and daughter very much. For their sake, he is ready to do anything. If Selena does not constantly interfere, as it seems to Casey, then Mickey is simply an ideal husband. But for Casey, it was completely unexpected when Mickey once poured a flood of emotions on her. Casey, a mother of two, can't be so careless. How many times can you leave your kids alone and go out with questionable friends? Who are these friends of yours? They're basically backyard drunks and bums. Do you really think you're on the same level as them? Everything has to be in moderation. I can't take endless days off work to take care of the kids. You need to rethink your lifestyle and get smart, said Mickey. Casey was even more confused. So she'd thought Mickey was on her side, but somehow Selena had swayed him to her side. It looked like her mother-in-law was getting serious about her now. That's what she thought, and took all the objective criticism she got. After a while, she really decided to change and become a responsible mother. In her mind, it looked like a working and earning woman. She decided to make a surprise for Mickey. She got a job as a sauna administrator, and Mickey informed her about it only on the eve of the first working day. But Mickey surprised her again with his reaction. Casey, you don't need to work and make money. I'm doing just fine. You just take good care of the children and don't think about money and work while they are little. When they grow up and become more independent, then please work for your own pleasure, Mickey said. Casey was very upset. She felt like she was being picked on for nothing. Everything she did was wrong, and everything was wrong. She remembered some advice from a fashion magazine that a woman should never give up on her goals, no matter what a man told her. So she decided not to give in to Mickey and go to work. Working in a sauna meant socializing with different people. However, those who wanted to socialize in the sauna often turned out to be drunk people. And these conversations are very specific. Young lady, you're so beautiful, but you're so sad. Did someone hurt you? On Casey's first day at work, there was a kind person at work who was ready to listen to her and feel sorry for her. Casey, out of the goodness of her heart, told her whole family story. The random visitor of the sauna must have regretted in his heart that he had started this conversation, but out of politeness, he listened to her to the end. As a man who lives solely in accord with his spontaneous impulses, the casual visitor made the decision to try to become a cordial friend to Casey. His name was Tony. Casey was getting more and more involved with Tony. He waited for her after work and took her to bars. Casey loved it when a man could just listen to your complaints and support you. And if he bought her a drink or a cocktail, in Casey's mind that equaled universal love. So Tony became a new meaning of life for her. Now, Casey could talk to him day and night. If Mickey or Selena were in a bad mood again, She could write or call Tony at any time. He would find time to take her to a bar, listen to her, and then spend a pleasant evening in solitude. Mickey was most worried about the children on a long business trip. The day before, he had sat Casey across from him and urged her to be more attentive and responsible for just a couple of weeks until he returned from his business trip. Casey took it all in stride again, but as soon as Mickey left, Casey asked her neighbor to watch the kids and went on the trip Tony had been asking her to take for a long time. Casey returned from her trip just before Mickey arrived, but the trouble was, their son Frederick seemed a little sick. Both of his eyes were swollen shut and almost completely closed. Casey rebuked her neighbor for not keeping a good eye on him. When Mickey returned from his business trip and saw his son in such a state, he was furious. He decided to take Frederick to the doctor that same evening. The doctor examined the child and shook his head. It is an infectious disease that affects the eyeballs very quickly. It's especially dangerous for children. I'll certainly try to treat it now, but you're running out of time. Your son is at risk of losing his sight completely, the doctor said. Indeed, Frederick's eyes began to itch and ache right after Casey left for her trip. By the time she returned, the damage to his eyes was extensive, and the boy had almost stopped seeing. Mickey expressed all his anger and resentment toward Casey. She, on the other hand, saw no fault in it. She still believes that Mickey just doesn't let her live the life she wants, especially since Tony assures her that he does. That night, Casey couldn't take it any longer and expressed everything she had in her heart. You restrict me from everything. You didn't like it when I stayed home. I got a job and found myself. Now I finally feel like a free person. But you don't want to respect that. I'm a human being too, and I have the right to live my life the way I want, said Casey. Casey, for God's sake, I too dream of you living a full life. But now that you're a mother of 2 children, isn't it time to consider them in your life? Do you feel like you can leave the house at any time to go out with your friends and party until morning? And mind you, this doesn't happen on holidays or on a schedule. It's your normal way of life. You reproach me with limitation. But do you have any standards of life yourself? Mickey asked. You're always torturing me with your conditions and demands, but it's different with Tony. He understands and supports me. I can have fun with him and talk to him. Not like you and your family, who have to do everything according to a set of rules, Casey blurted out. Mickey had a vague idea, of course, that working in an entertainment establishment was very much to Casey's liking. But he hadn't expected her to find another entertainer so quickly and to believe that it was the highest of feelings for life. By then, he'd had enough of that kind of life. As a result of that evening's arguments, they decided to part ways. Mickey felt it was right for the children to be raised by a hired nanny or their grandmother. Casey packed her things and left for Tony's. Mickey didn't bother to stop her. He was more concerned about Frederick's health. According to the doctor, only a major operation could restore his sight. And before the operation, someone should take care of the children. Selena, of course, had taken over completely. Mickey has decided to redouble his efforts at work to save up the money for the operation as soon as possible. He had to hurry up because Frederick would soon be starting preschool, and then it wouldn't be long before school. Changes were on the way for the second family. Julia only now noticed how much John had changed lately. He'd grown cold to her. Where before he would only stay at work for a few hours, now he might stay all night or even several nights. Julia was afraid to suspect him of cheating. She realized that if she judged based only on her assumptions, it would mislead her even more. And in order not to make mistakes in relationships, she needed to be very patient and judicious. Her past experience is a testament to that. How many times she could give in to the impulse of her emotions and lose her relationship with John for no good reason. So she decided not to make any decisions until she sees with her own eyes John's infidelity or another reason for his cooling off. Eva is already big enough, goes to kindergarten and dreams of going to school sooner. Julia intends to go to work soon and distract herself from bad thoughts about John. Could it be that sitting on such a long maternity leave, she too has become monotonous and uninteresting for John? On one such evening, John arrived unexpectedly early. He was drunk, something Julia had not observed him doing before. Little Eva missed her father and was now trying to draw attention to herself in every possible way. Julia noticed this and said, "Since you're home, why don't you and Eva take a walk while I clean the house and make dinner? Don't you have time to walk the baby all day?" John said in surprise, "We go out with her every day. Can't you see she misses you? Both parents are important to a child." "I don't understand your reaction," Julia said in a calm tone. "Both parents? Here I am, for example, an adult child, almost 5 years out of touch with my parents. What am I supposed to do?" John came very close and looked at Julia angrily. Julia was dumbfounded by John's unexpected behavior. She seemed to realize where her husband wanted to take the conversation. While she was trying to answer, John continued his claims. "Julia, do you think it's okay that I don't talk to my parents or even try? As a mom, you're supposed to be better at this than I am. Or do you still think my parents are our enemies?" Julia realized that she had been hesitant to talk to John about it for such a long time. She'd realized for a long time that she and John would sooner or later have to resolve the issue with her parents and most likely make the first step toward reconciliation. Only she knew John's adamant nature and had been hesitant to suggest it to him. And now she realizes that she was too late with this conversation. That night, Julia clearly realized that John felt resentment and anger towards Julia for not communicating with his parents. Like a reasonable woman, instead of returning resentment and recriminations, she began to think of ways to repair John's relationship with his parents. Eventually, she was able to formulate a clear plan. Mallory's birthday was coming up. Under this pretext, they will visit the parents with gifts, show them a granddaughter, and Julia will try to get Mallory back to her. But these plans were not to be. A couple days later, John came home drunk again. He had gotten caught up in some little thing and turned it into a big family scandal. This time, Julia learned something else new. John threatened to kick her out of the house, and Eva would stay with him. But Julia didn't understand why she deserved such an attitude. Her beloved husband didn't bother to explain. From that moment on, constant recriminations and scandals became a common occurrence in Julia's family life. It was little Eva who suffered the most. She began to sleep badly at night and practically refused to eat. After a while, her hair began to fall out. Then Julia became angry too. She decided to put an end to these endless conflicts, no matter what it cost her. She only had to look closely at his behavior to understand the reason for it. He had obviously been hiding something from her for a long time, but he had no desire to hide it any longer. In such cases, modern people are always helped by cell phones. Julia had never allowed herself to violate her husband's personal boundaries before, but today she realized that she had to deal with everything urgently and make important decisions. She reached for John's cell phone with these thoughts in mind. She wasn't too surprised when she found correspondence with someone named Sarah. There she saw various photos of Sarah and recognized her at once. It was the same lady who approached Julia at the corporate party and assured her that she and John were in great love. Then Julia took it for another intrigue of her enemies. Turns out she was very wrong. Judging by the correspondence, Sarah and John have gone very far. They have been living as a family for a long time and making common plans for the future. According to Sarah's messages, she has now pushed John into a narrow framework and set conditions for him to choose one of two women. Of course, Sarah makes it clear by the word choice that it's eliminating Julia and starting a new life with her. At that moment, John came out of the bathroom and saw Julia with his phone in her hands. Julia didn't pretend that nothing had happened. She was even relieved that the situation was finally clearer. John, too, seemed to have been waiting for this moment for a long time. Julia silently began to pack her daughter's things and put them in her suitcase. John saw the whole process and did not react. Couldn't you just say it without these protracted scandals that have been going on for almost 6 months? Julia was talking to herself. Julia has a long journey ahead of her as her parents live in another area. But Julia did not want to go to them. She had already thought out her future life. She and Eva would get to the capital. She would put her in a kindergarten, find a job, solve the housing problem, and then she would go to her parents and tell them about everything. And maybe John will still come to his senses and make a step forward during this time. In this case, Julia is ready to think everything over and once again try to save the family. But now she sees no point in it, as John is completely infatuated with Sarah, and in his picture of the world, Julia is still an extra person. As Julia packed 2 suitcases and headed for the exit, John stopped her. "Take only your things. Eva will stay with me," he said in a determined tone. "You'll have a new life now. Eva is still young and she has suffered enough from our fights with you. She needs care and peace, so I will take her with me anyway," Julia said. "Where will you take her? You have no job, no place to live. I won't let my child suffer a miserable existence. Please don't forget that Eve is the daughter of the Weasley family. She's entitled to a certain standard of living," John said, shocking Julia once again. The long argument turned into a loud scandal. As a result, John pushed Julia so that she fell to the floor. While she got up and came to her senses, he took her apartment keys, locked the door from the outside, and left. Julia had intended to pick up Eva from the daycare center and go straight to the train station. Now she wouldn't get to the daycare center either. She tried to call John and talk to him, but he dropped her calls. Julia hoped to the last minute that John would pick Eva up from the daycare center and bring her home in the evening. But in the evening, neither John nor Eva was there. She continued to call John persistently until she realized that he had finally blacklisted her. John showed up well past midnight. He was drunk again and incredibly angry with Julia. "Where's Eva? Did you pick her up from daycare?" Julia asked. "Don't worry about Eve. She's part of the Weasley family. It's about time she met her folks. I picked her up from preschool and took her to her parents' house. She's immensely loved and spoiled there. You can go wherever you want now." John opened the front door of the apartment and pointed his finger toward the exit. "John, come on. Eve's just a little girl. You can't keep me away from her. You tell me what I've done to deserve this punishment. I'm ready to let you go. I've always been ready to reconcile with your parents and try endlessly to win their favor. You're wrong if you think I've separated you from them. John, let's calmly discuss everything and make a decision together," Julia pleaded, but it was useless. John didn't listen to her words. He first pushed her suitcase out the door, then took her by the arm and pushed her out onto the landing. Julia realized that she had failed in her fight for her love. If she had been able to defeat all the intrigues thanks to John's love and support, what about now that he had betrayed her? Julia wandered around the city all night with her suitcase. In the morning, she decided to go to John's parents and try to talk to them. Her goal was to get her daughter back at any cost. Early in the morning, she pulled up in a cab to John's parents' house. She pressed the doorbell, and it didn't take long for the answer to come. Someone came to the door, opened it, and looked at Julia questioningly. "Hello, I'm here to see Mallory and Jacob," Julia said. She wondered if the strange woman who answered the door was the Weasleys' new maid, or one of the other household helpers. "I'm sorry, you mean the Weasleys? They sold the house 6 months ago and moved out. We're the owners now, and we don't know the Weasleys' new address," the strange woman said. Julia apologized for the disturbance, walked away from the gate, sat down under the fence, and tried to figure out how she could find the Weasley family. After a while, she got up and went around to all the neighbors, hoping to find out some information about the Weasleys' new place of residence. But the Weasleys were not in the habit of talking to their neighbors. Consequently, none of the neighbors even knew that the Weasleys had moved here at all. That was the first day of Julia's vagabonding. She didn't have much money on her. If she spent it on a night in a hotel now, there would be no money left for the journey. So she decided to spend the night at the nearest train station. Early the next day, she arrived at John's office and waited for him in the parking lot. It wasn't hard to catch John. Julia saw his car and came running. It was the same Sarah who got out of the car first, then John. Julia's attempts to talk to John were fruitless. He pushed Julia away from him and quickened his stride, heading for the entrance to his office. Sarah watched sullenly, then snorted in his wake, and together they hid behind the glass door of the business center. After 3 days of such tossing around, Julia realized that it was useless to fight for her daughter. She herself was exhausted during this time. She was not used to living on the streets. Julia decided to get to the city, there to try to organize her life, to gain new strength, and with the help of a lawyer to get justice. Tired, battered, and shabby, Julia had a hard time getting to the bus station and boarding the train. A few years earlier, Mickey's family had suffered a great sorrow. His eldest son had lost his eyesight because of his mother, Casey's negligence. Thankfully, at the time, Grandma Selena was alive and well. She took the children to her and took care of them. Mickey then set a goal to do the operation at any cost and restore his son's sight before he went to school. But when he saved up the necessary amount of money, it turned out that Frederick had a whole bunch of other diseases that did not allow him to undergo the operation. Doctors advised to cure other diseases first, and then only to perform eye surgery. So Frederick will be late for school for at least 2 years. In the meantime, he has to attend a school for the blind. Selena prayed and dreamed that her grandson Frederick would finally regain his sight and become a full-fledged child. But by then, she herself was already on the brink. Her life was cut short by an unexpected stroke. Frederick and Ariana, who was so accustomed to their grandmother, suffered the most. They missed her terribly. Then Mickey took them to his house and found a good nanny. The nanny helped them with organizing their lives until Frederick's surgery. Fortunately, the surgery was a success. The very next day, Frederick opened his eyes very cautiously and saw his daddy Mickey and his little sister Ariana in front of him. There was no limit to his happiness. He had lived a blind life for more than 5 years. Now he had to reacquaint himself with his surroundings, and it was a process he was enjoying immensely. Frederick couldn't seem to get enough of the world. Mickey, too, was endlessly happy about it. He took a vacation to spend as much time as possible with his children. The single father and his 2 children walked in the parks from morning to night, exploring nature, drawing and learning about the world of colors. Mickey was very inspired by his deep experience of being a father. Amidst the inspiration, the idea came to him to take a family trip across the country. After a couple of days, he gathered his children and traveled by train to the Tumen region to explore the unseen mysteries of the domestic expanse. There they spent an exciting 14 days and seemed a little even tired of the experience. They were looking forward to finally getting on the train and starting to explore the new pictures outside the window again. Mickey and the 2 children were not far from Julia, who was already fast asleep from fatigue. The train had already moved off. Frederick and Ariana did not sit quietly for long. After a few minutes, Frederick's curiosity about the world awoke again. He stared wide-eyed at the scenery outside the windows and continued to ask his father questions. "Daddy, what color are the mountains?" "The mountains are dark blue or gray. It all depends on the specific area." "You say the mountains are dark blue, and your pants are dark blue too. But then why don't they look alike?" Frederick asked. "Because it's clothes, and there's mountains, nature, Ariana tried to appear omniscient and answered her brother's questions. "Daddy, what color is Auntie's suitcase?" Frederick asked again. "It's burgundy, son." "And burgundy is also pomegranate and tomato," Ariana added. "No, daughter. Pomegranate is scarlet. Tomatoes are red or pink." Mickey patiently explained to his children. "I get it. Pink is like paint on this aunt's lips," Frederick said. He came close to Julia and almost poked his finger into her lips. If Julia had heard the annoying talk before, she opened her eyes abruptly and raised her head. Her body was shattered with fatigue. Her head ached, and she really wanted to sleep in this position for at least an hour. But this boy had turned his full attention to Julia and was asking his father about every detail of her clothes. Julia herself didn't notice how she had flared up at one point. "Man, maybe you can calm your child down. He asks too many questions. At this age, he should know a lot and certainly control his behavior in society," she said. Mickey clearly didn't like that remark. "Lady, don't be rude. You don't know anything about my son, and I won't let anyone make any remarks about him," said Mickey. "It's worse for you. Your son will grow up to be a rude bore." Julia didn't recognize herself in her emotions. "My son has recently started to see the world. Before that, he was blind. He is only in his second month of exploring his surroundings with his eyesight. I am doing my best to keep him looking at the world with an exploratory eye," Mickey said and switched to talking to his son. "And you probably don't have children of your own, so you don't know anything about this business," the older woman said toward Julia. "Don't worry, Grandma. I'm the best mother in the world, and I'll prove it. In the meantime, the fate of my child will be decided by an evil woman like you," Julia replied. "So rude," snorted the older woman and turned away to the window. "Where's the mother of your children? Isn't it hard for you to be a single father?" Another middle-aged woman approached Mickey. Mickey decided to ignore the curious questions of the others and continued talking to his children. But Julia was no longer able to control her emotions. She decided to answer instead of Mickey. Most likely his family survived the mother of those children, and now they are building the most caring relatives, Julia said, closed her eyes and pretended to be asleep. Mickey was confused. On the one hand, the lady had hit the mark. On the other hand, she wasn't quite right. So he decided to answer her. Society likes to blame men for not being involved enough in raising children. But even among mothers, there are unworthy ones who can leave their children in the middle of nowhere and quietly go on a long journey. Now, Mickey's words stick like an arrow into Julia's heart. For the past few days, Julia has been frantically trying to ward off the idea that she would be an unworthy mother if she left her daughter with her relatives and went away on her own. And then a complete stranger steps on her heartstrings. Young people, everything happens when you are young. Most importantly, if you sincerely love your family and do not betray yourselves in this love, then any hardships in life will be solved. It seems to me that you both have faced great adversity in your married life, and each of you blames the other. We don't know the whole situation. That may be the case, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is that you manage once again to find your strength and move on. Whether it is a direction to meet your family or from your family, let your hearts decide, said the elderly man with glasses. The rest of the way, they each thought about their own thoughts. Julia tried to imagine John in Mickey's place. Would he be able to care for his family as much as he did and protect it from outside attacks? Until recently, she believed that was the case, but it turned out not to be so at all. Mickey has realized from Julia's words that she has been forcibly deprived of her child and is depressed about it. He now tries to imagine Casey, who has never suffered much in her life for the sake of her children. At another station, the train stopped and passengers began to get off. Julia deliberately waited to be the last to get off. Wandering around in the unfamiliar area looking for a coffee machine, she found herself once again not far from Mickey and his children. They were picking out ice cream. "Hey Dad, You can't let kids eat ice cream in this weather. The kid's just out of surgery, so he needs to be careful of inflammation, Julia said and went on her way. Mickey did just that. He persuaded the children to give up ice cream and buy something else that wasn't cold. The children also clearly heard the words of the strange aunt and did not object. The train finally arrived at the final station. By this time, Julia had had enough sleep, and she felt energized. "Auntie, you have beautiful hair," said little Ariana to Julia, touching her hair with her little hands. Julia felt awful that her daughter had stayed somewhere else, while she was already in another city thousands of kilometers away. Ariana reminded her of Eve, who also admired her mother's hair and loved to mess with it for hours, trying to make it look nice. Julia looked at the girl silently, hugged her, and held her to her chest. At that moment, tears streamed from her eyes. She had barely contained her emotions for so many days, and now it seemed she no longer had the strength to control them. Mickey and Frederick looked at Julia and Ariana in surprise. "Don't cry, or your mascara will run out and smear all your makeup," Ariana said, and wiped Julia's tears away with her little hands. On the one hand, Julia was amused that this little princess was as knowledgeable about women's issues as her Eva was. On the other hand, when now she could see her daughter and hold her to her chest, would the Weasley family allow her to do that? "You'll forgive me for my emotions, I couldn't help myself." Julia said goodbye and looked at Mickey. "We all do. Which way are you going now?" Mickey asked. "I don't know yet. This is my first time in DC in the last 5 years. My parents live in a different area. I used to have friends, so I'll try to find them for the first time," Julia said. "Come with us. We have plenty of room in the apartment. You can rest and then start looking for your friends," Mickey suggested. "Auntie, come with us. I'll show you my makeup." "If you want, I'll do your hair," said little Ariana. Julia realized that she could not let go of this little girl, so she didn't resist the invitation to spend the night. It turned out that Mickey lived in a spacious and well-maintained apartment. Despite the absence of female hands, the apartment was perfectly clean and cozy. That night, Mickey ordered pizza. They had dinner together. The kids kept sharing their impressions and boring Julia with their questions. When it was time for bed, Mickey made Julia's bed in the living room. He himself went to tuck the kids into their rooms. The next morning, Julia intended to leave before the family woke up, but she didn't succeed. As soon as she tiptoed out of the bathroom, Ariana came running to her. "I promised you a beautiful hairdo. Let's do it now, shall we?" she suggested. Julia felt she could not refuse to let her little hands play with her hair for anything in the world. Her longing for her daughter was tearing at every fiber of her being. As much as Julia forced herself to leave early from the house of strangers, her soul did not want to part with Ariana. She promised herself that she would only make breakfast for the children and then leave to find her friends. When breakfast was ready, Ariana asked to stay and have breakfast together. At this time, the babysitter came to see them. Mickey sent the children for a walk with a nanny and started talking to Julia. "I can see you're having a hard time. What happened? What events have caused you to be so depressed?" Mickey asked. Julia told the whole story of her family life. Mickey realized that the girl was in a rather difficult situation and offered to help her with work. But Julia thanked him for his participation and refused to help. She kept hoping to find her friend Elizabeth, who had graduated from law school and was building a career in her specialty the last time they saw each other. Julia hoped to get some counseling from her friend and then think about setting up her life. Mickey walked her to the door and told her that if she didn't find her friend by tonight, she could go back to his apartment. Julia wandered around the city all day, trying to remember the address of Elizabeth's office, but the day ended without success. In the evening, it was necessary to return to Mickey's family again. The children, especially Ariana, was immensely happy to have Julia back. After a few days of empty attempts to find anyone she knew, Julia realized that she had been wrong to refuse Mickey's help in finding a job. She reminded him about it, and in 2 days, Julia's job search was solved successfully. She was hired by a company where Mickey's friend is the manager. Julia started working and continued to live in Mickey's apartment. She first offered some money for living expenses. Mickey ignored the question and said nothing. Her longing for her daughter was somewhat assuaged by Ariana. Frederick turned out to be a very sociable guy, so Julia quickly made friends with him. Julia got her first paycheck, and by that time she had looked for an apartment to rent. But before she moved in, she went to a lawyer for advice. He promised to help, but he had to drive her to the Tumen region at his own expense and pay a lot of additional expenses. All this requires additional time. The children accepted Julia's move with sadness. Julia promised to invite them to a housewarming party in the near future. The housewarming took place exactly 1 week later. Frederick and Ariana were sad that Julia didn't want to stay with them. They were even sadder that Daddy would soon go to work and would have little time for them. On one of the most ordinary days, Mickey called Julia and asked in an excited voice if Frederick and Ariana had come to see her. Julia was surprised because the children had definitely not come to see her. Mickey revealed that the children had left a note saying that they had gone to visit Julia. Julia wanted to take a cab and rush over to Mickey's house. But what would happen if the children came to her house while she was away? And the time was getting closer to evening. Mickey went to look for the children in the nearest neighborhood, while Julia waited for them at her house. A lot of time had passed, and there was no word from the kids. Mickey had to go to the police. The police were just looking for Mickey's contacts at the time. It turned out that Frederick and Ariana really decided to go to visit Julia, but on the way they got lost. They were found by the police and taken to the police station. When Mickey and Julia arrived at the police station, the time was well past midnight. After what had happened, Mickey decided to have a serious talk with Julia. Whereas before he had offered Julia a life together as help, now he was asking her for the sake of his children. He even promised to pay Julia just to keep his children happy, but Julia took offense at the offer to pay her money for company. She agreed to move back into Mickey's apartment. By that time, she realized that she had become attached to Ariana and missed her as much as she missed her daughter. Now Julia lives with Mickey and takes care of the children. The neighbors are already whispering that Mickey finally got married, and the new bride seems to be not bad. But Julia wasn't interested in a new relationship. She is still thinking day and night about how to take Eva back to her place. Meanwhile, Mickey was surprised to discover every day something new of a woman's real warmth and care for her family. It seemed to come so naturally to Julia. She easily found a common language with Mickey's children. She knew how to persuade them and pick up the right words. She enjoyed cooking delicious meals and was masterful at getting them ready to go out. In addition, Mickey had long ago noticed that Julia was quite good-looking. It was true that lately she had neglected her appearance a little, but Mickey had a clear idea of how stunning she would look if she gave herself some money and time. He decided to give her that treat. The following weekend, he gave Julia a certain amount of money and urged her to spend it on herself. Julia did so. In the evening, she returned home a refreshed young girl with a twinkle in her eye. Mickey realized that he could now gradually make steps toward winning Julia's favor, but he was very worried that his initiative to enter into a relationship might offend her. She had recently gone through a difficult breakup and was pining madly for her daughter. One night, when the children had gone to bed, Julia was talking about her daughter and showed Mickey a long ago family photo. Mickey looked at the photo and was literally stunned. "So this is your ex-husband?" Mickey asked. "Do you know him?" Julia asked. A pleasant smile appeared on Mickey's face. "That's John. He studied finance and worked in a trading company while he was still a student, and he was also boxing at the time, going to a gym in the old Arbat neighborhood. Am I right?" Mickey asked. "That's right. That's when he and I first met and dated, Julia said. Now give me his phone number, Mickey said. Julia dictated his phone number. Mickey wrote it down and said, I can't promise you anything, but I'll try my best to talk to him. Julia didn't pay much attention to Mickey's words. What could he do from a distance? This matter can only be settled through the courts, she thought. Julia was preparing breakfast for the children when the doorbell rang. She looked through the peephole and saw a strange woman at the door. Julia opened the door. Hello, who do you want? Julia asked. And good luck to you. And who are you? The woman, who smelled a pungent odor of booze, looked indignantly at me. At this point, Mickey heard extraneous conversations and went to the door. The unfamiliar woman saw Mickey and immediately turned to attacking him. Mickey, how could you let a strange woman into your house? Where are our children? The children need their own mother, not some strange woman. I want to see my children. A drunken Casey demanded to see her long-forgotten children in high tones. Despite Mickey's attempts to calm her down and send her back, she managed to make her way into the hallway of the apartment. Barely on her feet, Casey called her children by name, but Frederick and Ariana only looked out of their rooms and back shut themselves in there. Mickey managed to get Casey out with great difficulty. During this time, Julia managed to find out that the man for whom Casey left her children and her family had abandoned her long ago. Casey now has nowhere to live and no job. It was an amazing coincidence that it was during such a period that she remembered her children. However, there was still more to come. Casey now began to visit Mickey and Julia almost every day. The children absolutely refused to see the woman. They didn't even seem to remember her. But Casey continued to demand that Julie get out of here and vacate her apartment immediately. Attempts to peacefully negotiate and resolve the matter were unsuccessful. At one point, Julia felt genuinely sorry for Casey as a woman, but it was useless to talk to her about it. Then Julia decided to try a somewhat unconventional approach to solving the problem. From the family album, she took out some good photos of Casey and posted them on a dating site. There were quite a few offers. Julia carefully selected each of them to find a more or less suitable match for Casey. Julia honestly told all the men that she was looking for an easygoing man for her friend. From the candidate, she demanded serious intentions, a job and a great desire to meet a girl with whom you can live your life without much worry. And there were quite a few of them. Julia gave Casey's phone number to a few selected candidates and strictly warned that the bride did not know about the dating site and the efforts of her mysterious friend. For potential candidates, it did not prove to be a problem. After 3 days, Mickey's apartment was quiet. There was no more banging on the door or drunken debauches on the landing. Julia realized that it was likely that one of the potential candidates had found a way to approach Casey. But Mickey didn't know the whole story and was worried sick trying to think of a solution to Casey's attacks. Julia left him alone with these worries so as not to seem too resourceful. On one of the usual days towards evening, Mickey called Julia and asked her to come home early. He promised that there would be a surprise waiting for her at home. Julia thought that surely Mickey must have bought something or wanted to give her money for shopping and salons again. What was her surprise when, after coming home from work, she opened the door to Mickey's apartment and saw her Eve in the living room. She couldn't believe her eyes. It turned out that Eva had missed her mom a lot too. They were sitting in each other's arms right on the floor and couldn't get enough of each other. Only then did Julia become curious as to how Mickey had managed to get her daughter. Mickey only smiled enigmatically and promised to tell her everything at the family dinner. I was walking home from practice one day and noticed that in the darkness behind the garages 2 big guys were beating up one guy. The victim was almost unconscious. He had no strength left to resist or beg for mercy. The bullies were beating him brutally. I decided to stand up for this guy. I managed to quickly calm the 2 men down so that they ran away in the darkness, blazing their heels. The guy had already lost a lot of blood and was lying half dead, so I took him to the hospital, and a couple days later he came to. By that time, even his parents had arrived. I visited him a couple times, just for humanity's sake. Then his parents thanked me immensely and offered to ask me anything I wanted from them. Like an honorable man, I didn't ask for anything and just disappeared from these people's lives. But I do remember John's face. After I was discharged from the hospital, he found me and bought me a couple of beers. That was the end of our acquaintance. So the other day, I called his parents and reminded them of the thanks they wanted to give me years ago. I told them the truth and asked them to give Eva away. So today, John brought Eve himself. I promised the Weasleys that I myself would personally take care of their granddaughter as my daughter. Eve will be a sister to Ariana. All that's left is to get you to agree, Mickey told Julie. Julia thought for a moment that everything was happening as if in a dream. When Ariana and Eva hugged her from both sides, she realized that this was not a dream, but the real life she deserved. If I understand correctly, did you just propose to me? Julia turned to Mickey. Mickey only smiled back. Well, then I need to consult with the people who are important to me, Julia said. Then she turned to the children and asked, Frederick, Ariana, and Eva, are you ready to be brothers and sisters to each other and call Mickey and me Mom and Dad? Asked Julia. Yes, the children answered with glee. If the most important people say yes, how can I say no? Then I'll say yes too, Julia said. A couple of weeks later, Mickey and Julia were officially married. There were no more marital problems along the way. Maybe it was because they had paid a high price for happiness in advance.
Sarah ran down the street with her heart racing. She was late. But how could this be happening now? During the night, her phone had run out of battery, and the alarm clock, of course, did not ring on time. When the girl opened her eyes, she immediately realized that she had overslept. It was too light outside. Luckily, she had prepared her dress from the evening, and it didn't need to be ironed. Of course, she wanted to do light makeup, but under the severe time constraints, that would do. Sarah hastily tied a high ponytail and managed to eat a sausage sandwich. Yes, it was unhealthy, calorie-dense food. But in her early 20s, she was clearly not in danger of becoming overweight. And now the girl did not walk, but ran along the sidewalk, almost flew to the bus stop. If the bus was a little late, she could still make it. She really needed to get to the interview. There weren't many people around. The streets seemed unusually deserted. It was a busy time. Everyone had already gotten to work, and lunch was still a long way off. If Sarah had more time, she would have loved to see the bright colors in the flower beds and the leaves on the trees starting to turn yellow. The beginning of fall is the most beautiful season of the year. But the girl was hopelessly late because of her own short-sightedness. How could she forget to put her phone on the charger? Sarah quickened her pace. She needed to make a good impression on her employer. Otherwise, the girl didn't know what to do. Her life had never been sluggish, but lately things had gotten quite bad. Some kind of black streak with no end and no edge. But Sarah was not discouraged. She knew for sure that at her young age one must move forward. A black streak is followed by a white one. You just have to do something about it. Besides the fact that she did not whine and did not feel sorry for herself, the girl tried her best. She called all the companies in the city, looking for vacancies, even thinking about part-time work. Accountants, as it turned out, were required few, but much more often flashed vacancies for cleaners. What to do? If you cannot get a job in the profession, you will have to take any job. Money will not earn itself. You can't expect help, but you have to live. When Sarah was fired from the colony, where she had worked in the accounting department for almost 3 years, they tried to console her. Well, you're still very young, exhorted Susan Smith, the head of the personnel department. You'll easily find a new position. Who's to be laid off but you? Not Laura, she's raising a son on her own. Or Dolores. She's in her 60s. Who'd hire her at that age? And you're still a child. At least you can live with your parents. They're young and strong. It won't be a big deal if you're out of work for a few months. Get some rest. Susan Smith had no idea how Sarah was doing, but the girl didn't even try to explain anything to her. She knew it was useless. The penal colony where Sarah worked had been downsized, and now the institution did not need 3 accountants at once. Someone in the payroll department had to be fired. She, the youngest, was chosen. Susan Smith said that in case of emergency, the young girl could live with her parents for a while. She gave as an example her daughter, the same age as Sarah, who was studying at the institute, did not work and lived in the care of her mother and father. But Sarah's situation was completely different. True, she didn't talk about it much. Not that she was ashamed. The girl somehow managed to contrast herself with her own mother from an early age. Mother on her own, Sarah apart. But she just wanted to start a new life. It was one thing to present herself in the eyes of new acquaintances as just a girl from the village, and another the daughter of an alcoholic. Sarah was well aware that this fact of biography would definitely affect her image and reputation, and she tried to avoid it. As long as she could remember, her mother always drank. At first, the girl thought that this is normal, quite natural phenomenon. Sarah simply did not know anything else. But as she grew up, she looked around carefully and realized that it was not so. The other children lived in full families, wore new clothes, ate well, were looked after, given gifts. They were taken to the city for rides and movies, and Sarah was literally surviving. Fortunately, a kind-hearted neighbor, Pamela, looked after the girl a little. The old woman often treated Sarah to soup or called her home to warm up when her mother, drunk, closed the door and the girl could not get home. Pamela periodically tried to reason neighbor Amber, how can you behave like this? You wouldn't get in trouble. Get smart before it's too late. But Sarah's mother either listened to these admonitions in silence or answered the old lady rudely. At such moments, Sarah was very ashamed and offended for Pamela. The girl had such a mother, drank in the company of village alcoholics like her. The whole crowd often gathered at their house. They would party until morning, making noise, arguing, sometimes even fighting. It really scared Sarah, and she hid in the attic. There she had her own corner, a mattress, a plaid, a pillow, a few books given by neighbors, a flashlight. The girl did not feel safe in the room. Sometimes the mother tried to take up her mind. She even got a job then as a cleaner in the cow shed, then as an assistant in the canteen. The woman was welcomed, knowing that she had a daughter and feeling sorry for the girl. At first, during such periods, Sarah rested. She was reassured that everything would be all right. The house would be clean, and simple but delicious home-cooked food would appear on the table. Amber even paid attention to her daughter, took an interest in her life, made plans together. Sometimes she promised to take Sarah to the city, to the movies or amusement parks, but it never came to that. The mother snapped again, and everything returned night drinking, complete indifference to her daughter. Sarah grew up neglected. Sarah didn't know her father, but she hoped he was a prosperous, good man, though there was little chance of that. Her mother had been very beautiful when she was young, until she started drinking heavily. Sarah had seen old pictures of her. Maybe she had a great pure love then, the fruit of which was Sarah herself. Of course, the girl asked her mother about her father, but she invariably replied that she herself did not know who he was. She had a busy, fun life then to memorize and keep track of such little things. Fortunately, Amber had no more children. The first birth was complicated. Sarah grew up without siblings. Once she wanted a kindred, understanding person next to her together perhaps would be easier and more fun. But then the girl realized that all for the best. It is not worth her mother to become a large family if she does not follow one child. Sarah had never known her father and realized that she would never know. Not knowing allowed her to hope. The girl dreamed that the second half of the genes inherited from her father turned out to be more successful than the inheritance from her mother. Sayings like the apple doesn't fall far from the tree frightened her. Was she destined to be like Amber? But no way. Teachers, seeing the efforts of a child from a disadvantaged family, tried to support the student. Someone studied with her additionally. Someone bought some aids for the girl with his own money. Many people were interested in Sarah's fate. Once, when Sarah was finishing the 8th grade, she was summoned by the principal. Sarah went to the office, causing awe and terror in most school children, completely calm. The girl's conscience was clear, and Nicole was a balanced, calm woman who always wished Sarah only good. "Come in, sit down." The principal smiled broadly, and offered the girl to sit in the chair opposite her. That day they talked about Sarah's future. Nicole had suggested a wonderful option to enroll after 9th grade at a school in the city. Some friend of hers worked at the institution who could arrange a place in the dormitory for a country girl. Just imagine you'll live in the city, in a clean room to study. Then you'll find a job. Will you get married? Everything depends on you now. Will you manage? You'll have a good, happy life, Nicole said. Scared of hardship, you realize you have no prospects in our village. Look at your mother. Of course, Sarah would manage. She had no doubt about it. The prospects were breathtaking. A bright future loomed ahead. She wouldn't have to live forever in a cold, dirty house, where some unpleasant people, her mother's companions, were always crowding around. Sarah was sincerely grateful to the director for such an offer and participation in her destiny, and decided that as soon as she became successful, wealthy, and she did not imagine otherwise, she would return to the village and give Nicole a mink coat. At that time, Sarah associated this item of closet with wealth and luxury. The year flew by. Sarah studied very hard, preparing for college. Her teachers helped her as much as they could. The mother, while she behaved as usual, brought friends to the house, did not work. The woman lived and walked on the allowance that the state paid her as a single mother. The whole village collected Sarah for college. Her neighbors gave her clothes from their grown children, provided her with money for the first time, and wished her a happy journey. Find yourself a nice guy from a nice family, Grandma Pamela insisted. And don't come back here. There's no more life for you here. Sarah smiled. She was going to accomplish everything on her own, not with the help of some guy from a good family. A new life was just around the corner. The realization of that fact was exhilarating. It even made her dizzy. Then school started. Sarah chose accounting. Nicole advised, saying that Sarah has enough intelligence and accountants are needed in every organization, so the girl would not stay without a job. Sarah couldn't believe what was happening to her for a long time. She lived in a clean, spacious room with 2 roommates, ate well in the dining hall, received a scholarship, which she could spend on clothes and textbooks, and studied. Sarah gave herself completely to her studies. She had to become not just an accountant, but the best accountant. She had no margin for error. Sarah made warm friendships with her classmates and roommates. But from student parties, the girl invariably refused. There was nothing wrong with having fun on the weekend, of course. But the noise, the clinking of glasses, drinking, laughter, all this caused unpleasant associations. Sarah involuntarily drew parallels with what was happening at home, and nausea came to her throat. The girl vaguely realized that she had been traumatized by a difficult childhood, and something had to be done about it. But not now. The main thing now was to study and find a good job, so that she would never return to the village again. She had nowhere to go back to. 3 years of study flew by unnoticed. The girl matured, got used to the city. She was considered the best student of the course. And that's why the teachers helped her with employment. The place, of course, was not the most prestigious, a penal colony on the outskirts of the city. But she, a girl with no experience, was taken, as they say, right off the street. And the salary was promised to be stable, not very large, but with quarterly and annual bonuses. This money was enough for rent, transportation, and food. Sarah didn't dream of more. The girl rented a small apartment near the new place of work, and a new stage in her life began. Sarah still could not believe that she had become so mature and independent. How wonderful it is to be a child. The bad. Children are defenseless. They are totally dependent on their parents. With mom and dad, it's just a matter of luck. Sarah wasn't lucky. But now she thought. Now the girl was quite consciously enjoying her new position. She was a correctional officer, an adult, independent. Sarah couldn't believe what was happening to her. Her life would be whatever she wanted it to be. Sarah loved her job. At first, she was put behind the cash register. She didn't have much to do here. Except for the end of the month, when all the staff of the institution lined up for salaries and bonuses. On such days, she even had to stay late. It was here, near the cash register, that Sarah met Ben. The girl often saw this guy in the building. She liked his smile, so warm, open. He himself was short, skinny, not particularly noticeable. But the smile and the gray eyes seemed to be sly. And they definitely attracted attention. The girl knew that the guy worked as a driver, saw how he gave rides to the colony staff. He caused her some previously unexplored feelings. Sarah could not explain to herself what it was. She only liked to meet this man in the corridor. He always looked at her carefully, studying her, interested. And this look gave Sarah a pleasant chill in her stomach and made her palms sweat, an inexplicable reaction of her body. One day a handsome guy met Sarah in the hallway. In his hands was a bouquet of beautiful flowers. It was later that the girl found out that he was tearing them from the flower. The guy smiled. His cheeks showed charming dimples. For the most beautiful girl in the world. Sarah felt a wave of warmth. The girl silently accepted the flowers. She even lost her voice in surprise. But the guy's eloquence was enough for two. "You are incredibly beautiful," Ben complimented her. "And yet quiet, modest. My kind of girl. Would you mind if I took you for a walk?" "I'd love to." Sarah was too hasty. At that moment she felt the happiest in the world. "Then give me the address." "I know you live around here, don't you? 8 o'clock sharp. I'll be waiting for you at the door." And he did. Sarah came out before the appointed time, but Ben was already sitting on the bench, his long legs stretched far forward in his sneakers. That evening they both walked all around the neighborhood eating ice cream, laughing, talking about everything in the world. Ben was a great conversationalist with a well-tongued tongue. Sarah, always a little stiff, felt at ease and free with him. It was like magic. The girl told Sarah about her childhood. He had a way of being sincere. Probably because he didn't hide anything himself. Calmly said that he grew up in an orphanage and was not the most calm and obedient child, even in juvenile detention for theft. But then he got smart, studied to be a driver, found a job. He worked at a bakery. True, there he was framed by more experienced, clever colleagues, set up in such a way that Ben's shift lost money for products. Why, it was easy to think I was the guy, he grinned. A stint in juvie and orphanage. You couldn't find a better candidate for the role of a scapegoat. That's how I ended up back in juvie. I don't get it. Sarah, you had to do time again? Yeah, but my time wasn't up yet. What do you mean? It's like this. Didn't you know that? I thought you did. I'm a prisoner in a penal colony, serving my sentence. It's not a heavy sentence, so I work for the colony, I get a little money. The locals even let me into town, like today, for example. Sarah couldn't believe what she'd just heard. So this nice, friendly guy is a prisoner. What difference does that make, really? Ben is still the same charming, smiling, intelligent, very pleasant conversationalist. And Sarah obviously likes him. And the fact that he's in a penal colony, well, who doesn't? A guy was framed, and there's no one to stand up for him, just like there's no one to stand up for her. And in general, she and Ben have a lot in common: a difficult childhood and the need to make their own way in this life. Sarah decided that Ben's status didn't mean anything to her. The only thing that matters is that he's a good man, and he is. Even the staff trusts him. They let him go out on the town. "I've only got 4 months left on my sentence," Ben said. "Then I'll get out, get a job, and start a new life. I have a lot of plans." Ben and Sarah started dating. The girl fell in love with the cheerful, charming guy more and more every day. With him she felt beautiful, needed, loved, special, a very unfamiliar, but very pleasant feeling. Ben tried to help Sarah in everything. For example, he looked for people who had to sign her papers. He drove her wherever she needed to go, carried heavy folders for her from the archives, brought her delicious buns from the canteen. He was always there for her. From time to time, Ben was released in the city, and then he took the girl to the movies, cafes, theater. Sometimes they just wandered the streets, talking about all sorts of topics. However, with Ben, it was pleasant to be quiet. 4 months went by quickly. Ben was released and moved in with Sarah. Where else would he go? It was impossible to live in the apartment, which he had received as an orphan when he was released from the orphanage. It was in an emergency building, from which the bricks were slowly falling out. It was scary to even go in there. Sarah was happy about this turn of events. Now she and Ben lived together like a real family. The guy turned out to be a handyman. He repaired a leaky faucet, changed a light switch, pasted wallpaper. Any job he could do it with his deft hands. And how did Ben cook? The smell of his fried potatoes and mushrooms even made Sarah dizzy. The only thing that marred the idyll was that Ben couldn't find a job. In the morning when Sarah ran away to the office, Ben also left the house and ran to interviews until the evening. But when she came back from work, she found out that another day had been wasted. "They won't hire me anywhere," the guy shook his head sadly. "After all, 2 convictions and for theft. It's a stigma on me now. I can't get away from it." "I guess you'll find something," Sarah reassured him uncertainly. "Of course we'll get through this." But as time went on, nothing changed. Sometimes Ben had some money from somewhere, like he found a temporary part-time job. He'd unload a truck, then he'd spend a couple days at the market, then he'd work at a construction site. He'd spend it all on booze and snacks. Sarah was worried. Ben, the joker and the soul of the company, liked to have fun too much. He had a lot of friends with whom he often disappeared in bars and cafes. Sarah stayed home because she was tired after work. And she had to get up early in the morning, not like Ben. When the guy had no money, he lived on Sarah's salary. She kept silent, afraid of offending her lover, of spoiling their warm, trusting relationship. But the relationship was somehow imperceptibly changing. She and Ben had clearly drifted apart. Sometimes they couldn't even say a word to each other for an entire evening. No, the girl would have loved to talk to her lover. Sarah was still very attracted to him, whereas he had clearly grown cold to the girl. There was no longer the admiration in Ben's gaze that had once so enticed Sarah. When the girl tried to find out what was wrong, Ben became angry. "Why are you picking at my soul? Can't you see that? I'm going through a rough patch in my life. I've got to prove I'm not a criminal, find a job. And then there's you. But we don't spend enough time together. You're out with your friends all the time? I'm alone." "You should have fun too," Ben said. "You've got a lot of coworkers. You have a job and a paycheck. I'm out with my friends, maybe relieving stress. Do you think it's easy to feel second class? Everyone thinks being an ex-con means you're a lost cause. But they understand me and accept me for who I am. I understand and accept you." One day Sarah came home early and overheard Ben on the phone. He was talking to some woman, calling her Jenny and showering her with compliments. It was very similar to the way he had behaved with her in the first few months after meeting her. Sarah felt an almost physical pain in her chest, but still mustered up the courage to enter the room. Ben was a little embarrassed at first, but then angrily went into the kitchen where he calmly ended the conversation, only to return to the room. "What was that all about?" Sarah asked, trying to make her voice sound as firm as possible. "It was nothing in particular. This girl, I met her in a bar. Her dad's the shop foreman. I'm trying to get a job, you might say." That explanation satisfied Sarah at the time, probably because she really wanted to believe in this logical version. She just needed an excuse. Ben's job didn't work out after all. Despite everything, Sarah still loved Ben and hoped that things would work out between them. It is necessary just to survive this difficult period, and everything will be fine. But the black streak in the girl's life did not think to end. One morning, the chief accountant invited everyone to a meeting and said that there were going to be cutbacks, including the settlement department, where Sarah works. The girl tensed, of course, but she felt out of danger. Sarah worked for 2 people. She coped with all the cases perfectly. Besides, she was young. There's an older woman in the department. That she was a cousin of the boss, Sarah did not realize at the time. Sarah was not even alarmed when she was called to the HR department. Accountants and HR people have a lot of things in common. Nothing suspicious. But the supervisor informed Sarah of her dismissal. That evening, the girl, barely reaching home, collapsed on the sofa and burst into tears. What injustice! Why should she do this? She thought. Colleagues all day cheered Sarah, assured that she will easily and quickly find a job with an even higher salary. They said that everything was for the best, but they knew absolutely nothing about Sarah's life and situation. She can't be out of work for even 2 weeks. There's no way she could find a new job in that short a time. Business? Ben shook his head sadly. What are we going to live on now? I don't know, Sarah shrugged. You're not making any progress. It's quiet. Who needs an ex-convict? Yeah, that's how we got here, Ben sighed. We'll start looking at vacancies tomorrow, Sarah said, sobbing. I'll find something. I'm sure I will. I don't know. Jobs are hard to come by in the city right now, Ben was right. Sarah had heard that many times, but she hadn't cared about it before. After all, the girl worked in prison. She was absolutely satisfied with everything. who knew how to pay the rent. Ben continued to lament. It's getting close to the deadline. Are they going to kick us out? No, I have a little savings. Sarah shook her head. She was saving a little from each paycheck, saving for a vacation by the sea. She dreamed of spending a romantic vacation with Ben in a southern resort town. But now this sum will have to pay off the landlord, so that at least not to be without a roof over their heads. Oh, that's good, Ben said. I didn't know that. Because it was a surprise, Sarah smiled sadly. I have the money under my mattress in a blue book. What now? All the next day, Sarah tried to find a job. They sent out resumes to companies in the city. What if she got lucky? What if someone responds? The tired girl returned home only in the evening. Her legs were buzzing and she had a headache. But Sarah knew she'd done all she could today. Ben was gone. He must have gone out with his buddies to a bar or a club or something. Sarah didn't understand how he could be so careless about the future. For her, not having a job was a disaster. And him? He didn't worry, he lived and had fun, enjoyed the little things. Maybe it was that easygoing nature that made Sarah fall in love with Ben. Something was wrong in the apartment. Sarah felt it at once, but only then realized what it was. There were fewer shoes around the doorstep. Ben had left in one pair of sneakers. That was understandable. But where had the other two pairs gone? And where was the laptop that Sarah had bought on credit? It always stood on the living room table. The girl, obeying a sudden impulse, opened Ben's clothes closet. There were no jackets, no pants, no sweaters. Slowly, the bitter truth began to reach Sarah. Ben had left, packed his things, and not just his own. He'd taken his laptop too, and disappeared, without even explaining anything to her. Sarah dialed his number, but all she heard in response was a short beep. It looked like Ben had blacklisted her or changed her number altogether. But why? He must have met someone else. Maybe he'd even gone to the same hottie Sarah had overheard talking to him. It hurts, but it's understandable. The only thing I don't understand is why Ben left without saying goodbye, and without saying anything, just ran away. Did what was between them mean nothing to him? The problems with her job suddenly faded into the background. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt a searing, tugging pain in her chest. She couldn't hold back the emotions that had come over her. She burst into uncontrollable sobs, which, as it turned out, had even more unpleasant circumstances. It turned out that Ben had taken the money from under the mattress. The very money that Sarah had planned to spend on the rent. The rent was due in a week. If she didn't, the landlord would kick her out on the street. And go where? Sarah had absolutely nowhere to go. She sat on the floor with her hands on her knees and thought. All sorts of thoughts collided and jumbled in her head. Ben, who was he? An unhappy orphanage boy with a hard fate, or a common criminal who could never be reformed? Had he ever loved her? Or was he just using her? And she, naive fool, didn't understand anything. Would the landlord give her an extension on the payment? Maybe he'd take pity if she explained the situation to him. Or, on the contrary, immediately kick her out the door as an insolvent tenant. Would there be a job for her in this big, uncomfortable city? Sarah quickly tired of her heavy thoughts and fell asleep on the floor in the hallway. There was no strength to crawl to the couch. In the morning, the girl washed her face, combed her hair, ate breakfast, and went to look for a job again. Soon Sarah realized that it was almost unreal to get a job in her profession now, and began to look at other vacancies. Okay, she'd have time to become a great accountant. For now, she had to find any place, as long as it paid money. Sometimes the girl was invited for an interview. They promised to call her back, but never did. And soon Sarah stopped believing these assurances. She searched hard, but to no avail. She had no money left at all. The girl stretched the last packet of groats and a loaf of bread and had no idea what to do next. Her situation was becoming more and more desperate. That's when the call came from the cleaning company. Sarah had been to an interview with them about a week ago. They didn't hire her then, but now there was a vacancy for a cleaning assistant, and the girl got a call back. The woman from the HR department asked Sarah to come in the morning with her documents. Only she warned her not to be late, because they didn't want any non-committal employees. And it should happen that Sarah forgot to charge her phone the day before. In the morning, the alarm clock did not wake the girl in time. She woke up on her own. She looked at her watch and was stunned. And now Sarah flew to the bus stop, not noticing everything around her. Just to make it, just to get to the office on time. She needed this job so badly. Sarah walked hurriedly down the sidewalk. Suddenly, a strange sight caught her attention. A pale, frightened old woman was sitting on the sidewalk. There was horror in her eyes. The old woman was struggling to breathe, a hoarse squeak escaping from her lungs. Sarah stopped, looking around. She should call for help, but there was no one nearby. It wasn't rush hour, so there was no one to help this woman but Sarah. But if she's late for her interview, she's out of a job. Wouldn't you? But Sarah couldn't pass up an old woman in desperate need of help. How can you leave someone in this position? What's wrong with you? The girl squatted down in front of the woman and looked into her face. Sarah ... she said with difficulty. Sarah had never seen people's lips so blue before. An ambulance? She asked. The old woman nodded. Sarah dialed the ambulance number, explained the situation to the dispatcher, and gave the address. The deed was done, but she couldn't leave the woman alone on the sidewalk and decided to wait for the ambulance to arrive. Sarah was hopelessly late for her interview. She could forget about the job, which meant there was nowhere to rush and nothing to worry about. "What's your name?" the girl asked, sitting down next to the old woman on the sidewalk. "Deborah," she exhaled. "Thank you, sweetheart. Don't ever leave. I'll sit here with you. Please, please, I'm afraid to be alone." "Were you in a hurry?" The woman spoke intermittently, taking hoarse breaths every now and then. But it was obvious that she needed companionship now. It distracted her a little, prevented her from panicking. "It's nothing." Sarah waved her hand. "No, it's important." The old woman struggled and tried to smile. "I saw on your face that you were in a hurry." "Yes, it's not an interesting story. I'll tell you later, if you promise to get better quickly." "It happens to me. Not for a while, though. My heart hurts. I need a shot. Well, they know in the ambulance, and everything will be fine." Just then, a yellow car with a horn honked. Two uniformed men got out and approached the old woman. Sarah stepped aside, letting the specialists do their work. They asked Susan Smith a few questions and actually gave her an injection. Within moments, the old woman's skin color began to take on a normal hue, and most importantly, her lips went from blue to a normal pink color. Deborah was getting better before her eyes. It was like magic. Doctors are a bit of magicians after all. Sarah thought the ambulance would take the old lady away after such a terrible attack. What's a hospital without a hospital? But the paramedics got into their car and drove off. And Deborah, smiling broadly, approached the surprised Sarah. "Don't you have to go to the hospital?" the girl asked. "What did I forget there?" The injection was given. The attack was relieved. "Now I will go to the outpatient clinic to my cardiologist. He will choose pills, and I will again live peacefully for several years. It's a good thing I'm lucky I came across you, baby. Otherwise I'd be lying here on the asphalt, no people around. Only cars passing by on the road. They don't even look around. It was an accident. I should have been here earlier. I was just late today because of my alarm clock. Now I'm glad I did. By the way, you promised that if I felt better, you'd tell me your interesting story," Deborah reminded me. "Remember, now you're in no hurry." Sarah smiled. "I'm in no hurry now. But there's really nothing interesting about it. Let's check it out." And Sarah told Deborah about her life, even mentioned her childhood, so that the old woman understood the girl has no home. She has nowhere to go. Deborah listened attentively to every word, sometimes sighing sadly, sometimes shaking her head. "Yes, you've had a hard life," she summarized after listening to Sarah's confusing story. She didn't even understand why it had happened. "But you say you suddenly felt better. And then I look at you with such understanding, even regretted, did not say anything. The main thing is working hands and feet. I'll find a new job somehow, don't doubt it. But it's hard for such a young girl in a big city all alone." Without support, Sarah smiled sadly. "It's my fault," Deborah said thoughtfully. "You lost your job because of me, didn't you?" "No way." Sarah shook her hands. "Don't even think about it." "I am thinking about it," she said. "And I've already thought of something." And Deborah suddenly made Sarah a completely unexpected offer. She invited her to live in her apartment. "Until things get better, no problem." "But I'm uncomfortable," Sarah admitted. "Uncomfortable sleeping on the ceiling?" The blanket falls down? Parried the old woman suddenly, and then added, seriously, honey, you actually saved my life. To give shelter to a kind girl in need of help, how hard can it be? And I myself will have more fun with you. I was all alone and alone. And so Sarah came to live with Deborah. The old woman gave her a whole room of her cozy 2-room apartment, the brightest and most beautiful, with windows overlooking the park. Deborah's offer came in handy, because the very next day after they met, the owner of the apartment asked Sarah to move out. She couldn't pay the rent, and the landlord immediately found new tenants. Sarah was given 24 hours to pack. The girl managed much sooner. She packed her belongings in a single suitcase and went to Deborah's house in the evening of the same day. The lonely old woman was obviously sincerely glad to have a lodger. Deborah behaved with Sarah in such a way that she soon stopped feeling awkward and constrained. Yes, it was an unusual situation, but it was good for everyone. Sarah had a roof over her head. And Deborah? She wasn't lonely anymore. She had someone to talk to watch TV with, to discuss news and recipes, to share her worries and joys. That meant a lot to an elderly person. Sarah, of course, tried to help Deborah in everything, but she herself clearly liked to take care of the girl. The old woman often cooked something tasty for her. She baked pancakes, fried pies on a griddle, made delicious stews of chicken and vegetables. No one had ever tried so hard for Sarah. Sometimes the girl even had tears in her eyes. How pleasant it is, such care. Sarah found a job after all. 3 weeks after the move, she got a job as a sales clerk in a neighboring store. The experience of working in the cash register at this place came in handy. When the girl came home, there was always the smell of something delicious: pies, homemade borscht. Deborah immediately led her to the kitchen, assuring her that a tired girl should definitely eat and rest. Sarah did not object. The girl often felt as if she had known Deborah all her life. She was surprisingly easy to be with, as if it was a normal thing to live with a complete stranger, a stranger in fact. After getting a job, Sarah tried to offer Deborah money to rent a room, but she flatly refused. Oh, really? Are you like a niece or a granddaughter to me now? There's no way I'm taking money from you, and don't make it up. You'd better save it. Maybe gradually you'll have enough to buy your own place. Over time, Sarah learned Deborah's sad story. The old woman realized why she was alone in her old age. It was really very sad, scary even. Deborah was born in the village to a large family. She was the eldest of 4 sisters. When the girl was 10 years old, her mother died. Her father soon remarried. So into the house came the stepmother, as evil, cold and demanding as in the old fairy tales. She had 2 children, a daughter and a son, the same age as Deborah's younger sisters. This woman immediately disliked Deborah as the oldest and, understandably, a stranger. Her father's wife knew that Deborah saw and noticed everything, and how her stepmother chose the best bits for her children and gave her stepdaughters the leftovers, and how she was always complaining to Papa Gordon about the ill-mannered girls, and how she slowly dragged Deborah's own mother's few pieces of jewelry into her jewelry box. That was particularly hurtful for some reason. Stepmother forced her eldest stepdaughter, Sarah, to work from dawn to dusk, scrubbing floors, cooking, caring for the younger ones, cleaning the livestock. With her arrival in the house for the girl ended childhood. She no longer ran with her friends on the street, did not play with her favorite toys. Talika studied and worked on the household. Instead of gratitude for her help and work, the girl received from her stepmother only reproaches. The bed is not so made, and the borscht is not salty, and the child is unattended, fell off the stool, and hit through her teeth. The woman talked to Sarah, called her a girl, and sometimes even allowed herself to hit the girl, then on the cheek, then on the cheek, then on the head, then on the back. The stepmother was tough to deal with. Sarah was shocked at first. Her mother never laid a finger on any of them, always explained everything with words and here. And then the girl somehow got used to this state of affairs and accepted it. Even if Sarah tried to complain to her father, but he was completely on the side of the stepmother. She had already managed to explain to her husband that this is just a method of education, effective and efficient. I do not want to raise children lazy, inept. That's what I'm trying to do, she said. And the fact that Sarah grew up as a quiet girl did not exclude fears. That's the 10th thing. The main thing, she knew how to obey and work on the household. As time went on, Sarah grew up, became a teenage girl. She did not do well in school, despite her natural abilities. Earlier, before her mother's death, she was an excellent student. She was especially good at the exact sciences. But now the girl had almost no time for lessons and studies. Sometimes her stepmother wouldn't let her stepdaughter go to school at all. This happened if there were a lot of household chores or needed to look after the younger ones. But met on the girl's way a kind, caring person, school math teacher Gordon. All teachers saw how hard it was for his student. But this man, a frontline soldier and father of 5 children, did not want to stand aside. He had some acquaintances in the city boarding school for gifted children. He begged them to take an enabled girl who was in a difficult situation. When the teacher told me about it, I was happy at first, Deborah recalled. But then I thought about my stepmother and realized that it wouldn't work. She would never let me leave home. How could I be left without a free maid all of a sudden? But Gordon talked to Deborah's father, explained what prospects awaited the girl in the city, and he gave the go-ahead. Deborah left home at 15 and never went back. Life at the boarding school was good. In the morning, the children went to classes, after them to the canteen, where a delicious lunch was waiting for them. Then there was free time, during which they could walk, rest, and of course do homework. Deborah was finally able to play, socialize with peers, and quietly do homework. At first, the girl lagged behind the class. The lack of opportunity to learn properly earlier was the influence, but Gordon warned that it will be so. He advised to study especially hard at first, and assured that capable Deborah will quickly catch up with the rest. And so it was. After the new year, the girl became one of the best students in the class. See how much we have in common. Deborah smiled at Sarah. I too had to leave home, literally run away from my cruel stepmother and indifferent father. I too had to learn on my own, to make my own way in this life. Ended childhood. She no longer ran with her friends on the street, did not play with her favorite toys. Talika studied and worked on the household. Instead of gratitude for her help and work, the girl received from her stepmother only reproaches. The bed is not so made, and the borscht is not salty, and the child is unattended. Fell off the stool and hit through her teeth. The woman talked to Sarah, called her a girl, and sometimes even allowed herself to hit the girl, then on the cheek, then on the cheek, then on the head, then on the back. The stepmother was tough to deal with. Sarah was shocked at first. Her mother never laid a finger on any of them, always explained everything with words, and here. And then the girl somehow got used to this state of affairs and accepted it. Even if Sarah tried to complain to her father, but he was completely on the side of the stepmother. She had already managed to explain to her husband that this is just a method of education, effective and efficient. I do not want to raise children lazy, inept. That's what I'm trying to do, she said. And the fact that Sarah grew up as a quiet girl did not exclude fears. That's the 10th thing. The main thing, she knew how to obey and work on the household. As time went on, Sarah grew up, became a teenage girl. She did not do well in school, despite her natural abilities. Earlier, before her mother's death, she was an excellent student. She was especially good at the exact sciences. But now the girl had almost no time for lessons and studies. Sometimes her stepmother wouldn't let her stepdaughter go to school at all. This happened if there were a lot of household chores or needed to look after the younger ones. But met on the girl's way a kind, caring person, school math teacher Gordon. All teachers saw how hard it was for his student. But this man, a frontline soldier and father of 5 children, did not want to stand aside. He had some acquaintances in the city boarding school for gifted children. He begged them to take an enabled girl who was in a difficult situation. When the teacher told me about it, I was happy at first, Deborah recalled, but then I thought about my stepmother and realized that it wouldn't work. She would never let me leave home. How could I be left without a free maid all of a sudden? But Gordon talked to Deborah's father, explained what prospects awaited the girl in the city, and he gave the go-ahead. Deborah left home at 15 and never went back. Life at the boarding school was good. In the morning, the children went to classes, after them to the canteen, where a delicious lunch was waiting for them. Then there was free time, during which they could walk, rest, and of course do homework. Deborah was finally able to play, socialize with peers, and quietly do homework. At first, the girl lagged behind the class. The lack of opportunity to learn properly earlier was the influence, but Gordon warned that it will be so. He advised to study especially hard at first, and assured that capable Deborah will quickly catch up with the rest. And so it was. After the new year, the girl became one of the best students in the class. See how much we have in common. Deborah smiled at Sarah. I too had to leave home, literally run away from my cruel stepmother and indifferent father. I too had to learn on my own to make my own way in this life. After boarding school, Deborah easily entered the university. She was given a dormitory. The fragile, beautiful girl chose the profession of an engineer. She graduated from the institute with honors. She got a job in a design bureau, from which she immediately received a small apartment as a young, promising employee. It was easier back then, with housing for young professionals. Deborah sighed. Is it more difficult for you now? So the girl stayed in the city. Now she was a real engineer. At work, Deborah was respected for her hard work, keen mind, and willingness to help others. After a few years, she became head of the department. I thought I was going to live like this for the rest of my life, Deborah said. I decided to devote myself to my work. I liked that kind of life without children in the family. I didn't want that at the time. I studied very hard as a child. I thought I had done my fair share. Only fate had it differently. Deborah often flew to New York for work. This time she was sent for training. The woman loved such business trips. They perfectly diluted gray everyday life, gave new emotions and impressions. After the seminar, Deborah decided to walk around the city. She liked these wide, crowded streets, so spacious, so lively, not at all like their small, quiet town. Deborah walked slowly along the river embankment, looking at the boats and pleasure boats with dressed-up tourists. The sun was slowly sinking below the horizon, painting everything around her an incredible yellow-pink color. It was at that moment that Chris approached her. A young, tall man with a charming smile and warm gaze immediately introduced himself. He apologized and showered Deborah with compliments, calling her a mysterious beauty, a queen, a beautiful stranger. Of course, by the time she was 45, Deborah had been in relationships, and in more than one. And she'd learned to take compliments. But then something suddenly fluttered inside. Chris, seeing it, became enthusiastic, glowing. Deborah was pleased to realize that her presence alone made this man so happy. They took a long walk. That evening, Chris turned out to be talkative. And it was very useful, because in the conversation there were no awkward pauses and hiccups. He amused Deborah, making her laugh at his jokes. After a couple of hours, it seemed to her that she had known this man all her life. She did not want to part with him at all. That's why Deborah didn't come back to the room alone. The concierge looked at us like that. Deborah smiled. What was the big deal? We were both adults. Who cares? The next morning, Deborah found Chris in the room, as well as her wallet with money, gold jewelry, and even a few almost new dresses. Everything fell into place. Chris had just grasped her trust, said a lot of things, waited until the new acquaintance relaxed, and was so. Deborah did not report him. It would look too unattractive in this story. She met a man on the street, brought him to her room, and he turned out to be a common criminal. Reputation would be seriously damaged. You see, that's a coincidence. Deborah smiled at Susan. Both you and I were fooled by a man. It happens. Only mine not only took my valuables, but left something behind without even realizing it. A month after the ugly story, Deborah realized she was expecting a baby. There was no doubt about who the father was, the same Chris from New York. Deborah didn't know what to do. On the one hand, the child she could pull and alone would be no worse than a married woman. Her apartment was spacious and comfortable. The salary of the head of the engineering department allowed to provide even more than one baby. On the other hand, age. At that time, to give birth at 45 to the first child was considered catastrophically late, although now it does not surprise anyone. And what would people say? Deborah still had strong provincial prejudices about living with an eye on neighbors and acquaintances. And yet the woman made up her mind, realized that this was her last chance to become a mother. She might never get another chance. She had once decided for herself that she would live without children. But realizing that a new life was born under her heart, suddenly desperately wanted to keep this baby. And that's how Deborah got Bill. This guy grew up to be amazing, attractive, charming, smart. Bill had many talents. He drew beautifully, started reading early. He definitely had a knack for math. Even from an early age, the boy was fond of sports, tried many things: soccer, basketball, karate, skiing, hockey. Deborah supported all of her son's hobbies. Bill was a joy to her. She had never imagined that it was possible to love someone so much. The boy reciprocated his mother. He helped around the house, made surprises and gifts just like that, without a reason. Time flew by very quickly. Deborah went on a well-deserved vacation. Bill grew up and went to study, as his mother once did, for an engineer. At the university, he started hiking. The department had a section for students. Wherever they went, they rafted on the river, went to the forest for a week, and went down into the caves. On that fateful day, a group of students went into the mountains. Deborah's heart had been troubled for days before the hike. There was no doubt in her mind that Bill was an excellent climber. Her son is agile, trained from childhood, smart, will not make mistakes. But not everything depends on people. There are unforeseen circumstances. The mountains were a 3-hour drive from the city. The students were going to conquer a particularly difficult peak. The day before, Bill had excitedly told his mother how he had long dreamed of climbing the peak. In the afternoon, Deborah somehow got wound up. A friend came over. Then they went shopping together. Distracted, Deborah even stopped worrying. That evening, that phone call rang. Deborah, looking at the phone, froze. For some reason, she didn't want to pick up the phone. Something told her she was about to get some bad news, and so it was. A group of students had been caught in a mudslide down the mountain. Several people were killed, many injured. 2 boys, including Deborah's son, went missing. And endless hard days dragged on for the 2 elderly mothers. Rescuers spent a long time removing the rubble. Among the rocks and dirt, they found the body of one of the missing boys. Bill, the other one, was never found. You realize there's no chance the man in uniform explained to Deborah. If he was alive, he would have made himself known by now. He stayed under the rubble. It's physically impossible to make out everything. Bill was recognized dead, but for 3 years Deborah could not accept this state of affairs. She never saw the body, so she could not believe what had happened. So Deborah lived with a faint hope for a miracle. The old woman showed Sarah pictures of her son. From them smiled an attractive young man, tall, athletic, with blue eyes. Even from these pictures, it was clear how energetic and cheerful he was. It's hard even for me to believe that such a man no longer exists, Deborah sighed as she looked at the photos. She smiled too, and she often said, maybe we'll see him again. My intuition tells me he's alive, the woman shook her head. Perhaps I just want to believe it, and yet I feel that he is alive out there somewhere. Once a year, on the day of the tragedy, Deborah would visit the place where it had happened. She sat there at the foot of the mountain, admired the scenery, and remembered her Bill. She would leave flowers at the site of the tragedy for those guys who died under the rubble. After hearing this story, Sarah felt even more for Deborah. She felt sorry for the older woman who had never been able to come to terms with her loss. But Deborah's resilience, her belief that Bill was alive, both admired and caused a pang of sadness in her heart. A year and a half passed imperceptibly. Sarah lived with Deborah and worked as a saleswoman, but she wanted more. Did she study accounting for nothing? So Sarah was always looking for a job in her specialty. And one day luck smiled on her. The girl got a call and was invited to an interview at the factory. An accountant was required. Sarah went to the meeting in a calm mood. Sarah had already been to so many interviews that she could write a book for beginners. If she didn't get the job, it was okay. She had a job, a roof over her head. Not like a year and a half ago, when she suddenly found herself in a desperate situation. She's fine now. But they hired her and told her right away that she was a good fit. They didn't even say, "We'll get back to you." Sarah gasped at first with a rush of emotion. Had her long-held dream come true? Would she really work in her profession in such a big factory and get a good salary? She couldn't wait to share the news with Deborah. Sarah was also given a dormitory at the factory. The building itself was far out of town. Every day you drive back and forth, you get tired, Deborah said. Most of the employees lived in a cottage community nearby. The rest occupied rooms in a comfortable dormitory on the adjoining property. Deborah was happy for the girl. But the news that Sarah would have to move saddened the old woman. "I'm so used to you. I'm going to miss you," she admitted. "But I'm happy for you. It's a dream come true. I will come to visit you often," she promised. She understood that she would also miss this cozy apartment and kind landlady. Deborah saved her, offered help in a critical situation, became a really close person for Sarah. The girl will never forget her. A new stage of life began. At work, she had to get into everything anew. She had forgotten a lot of things during her work as a salesman. Sarah made a lot of new acquaintances. Everything was so exciting, so wonderful, so new that the girl could not keep her promise to visit Deborah every weekend. She understood everything, and did not take offense. But Sarah made sure to call the old lady every evening, asking about her affairs and sharing the news. Deborah always listened attentively, praised and supported her. Sarah felt strong after these conversations. One day the old lady called Sarah herself. It happened on New Year's Eve, when the town was preparing for the holiday. The girl tensed up a little. She usually called Deborah herself. Suddenly she was the first one to call. Was something wrong? She realized that nothing was wrong as soon as she heard the familiar voice. The always calm Deborah could barely contain her emotions. Bill has been found. The old woman almost shouted into the phone. He's here. He's alive. Sarah could not believe what she heard. Unlike Deborah, she shared the opinion of the rescuers and the police that the boy had not survived. He came home this morning, opened his own key. Can you believe he hasn't lost it in over 4 years? It's a miracle. Sarah felt tears running down her cheeks. It's incredible, she exclaimed. Yes, it is. As a physicist and a mathematician, I have to admit that there are miracles after all, said Deborah. After all, the chances of salvation for Bill were minimal. What now? Asked a worried Sarah. What's it going to be like now? Well, Bill has so much to do now. He's been declared dead. There's a lot of paperwork to get him back on paper. He's dealing with it. What about me? Sarah asked. I don't want to get in his way. A man needs to rest, get used to everything. You don't know my Bill, Deborah grinned. He's always happy to have visitors. We've had a bunch of his friends at our house since he was a kid. Bill never knew how to relax. Sarah could hardly wait for the weekend. She wanted to see Deborah's son sooner and learn his amazing story. Where was this man for so many years? Why did not give any information about himself? But the girl was worried before the trip, too. Sarah was worried about how this Bill would take her. The girl who had occupied his room for a whole year and a half while he himself had been missing somewhere, perhaps enduring hardship. Deborah opened the door for Sarah. It was as if she had grown younger these days. Her eyes shone with happiness. Hello, come in. Deborah hugged Sarah tightly. The girl gingerly entered the hallway. From the kitchen came voices and laughter. It was Bill's comrades who had come. One of them was with him in the mountains during the mudslide. He had a long convalescence. But he's all right now. He's alive. Come on, don't be shy. Sarah went into the kitchen. There were people sitting around the table. Deborah's friend, 2 guys a little older than Sarah. A smiling girl. On the wide windowsill sat Bill himself. The girl recognized him immediately from the photos. He looked at the guest and smiled. Slightly disheveled blonde hair, tanned face with correct features, clear blue eyes, wide smile. You are the Sarah that Mom saved. The boy easily jumped down from the windowsill and came closer. He scrutinized the woman who entered. Sarah was embarrassed under his gaze, but the guy's proximity was unexpectedly pleasant. But saved. That's a big word for it, the girl replied. And you? You are the man who disappeared 4 years ago. And then suddenly found? Yes, I am. Bill grinned. That's quite a story. You could make a movie. The evening passed quickly. The company was good and warm. Sarah was welcomed. She didn't feel like a stranger, though she saw everyone here, except Deborah and her friend, for the first time. For the first time, Bill told his story to the crowd. Apparently, he had to explain what had happened to him not for the first time, and remembering the past was not very pleasant. But the people close to him wanted to know the story, and the guy told it over and over again. Bill was one of the first in the group to realize that something terrible and inevitable was happening. First, he heard a growing rumble. Then he saw a dark mass coming at them from the top of the mountain. There was nowhere to hide. There was no escape. Their group was just coming up the steep climb. It wasn't hard to run all the way up there. Bill had time to look down. He saw the multicolored bright helmets of his classmates, who had no clue about anything yet. Somewhere far below, a river was winding in the sun. The next instant, Bill was hit by a heavy wave of mud. The boy felt himself being carried downward at a terrifying speed, and then he lost consciousness. Bill woke up in the hospital. He was covered in abrasions and deep cuts. His legs, his arms were broken, his head was shattered. The doctor promised the boy would live. Then he asked him his name. Bill opened his mouth to answer, but suddenly realized he didn't know his own name. He couldn't answer any of the questions. He couldn't remember where he came from or what had happened to him. Had no idea who his parents were. Didn't know anything about himself at all. Everything from before the hospital was strangely erased from his memory. It's amnesia. It happens, the doctor explained. After a brain injury, the memory is bound to come back. But time passed, and the boy still could not remember anything about himself. It frightened him, made him afraid for the future, and for the past too. Who was he suddenly in that life, of which there were no memories? Had he done something terrible, or had something terrible happened to his family and friends? Why did his brain shut off his memory? There's a reason. The guy was in the hospital for months. All this time, doctors and police tried to find his relatives, gave ads in newspapers, sent out an orientation. There was even a story about him on the local news. But no one ever responded. No one is looking for you, it seems, sighed the head doctor, looking at the unusual patient. Are you really such a lonely person in your young years? The boy was silent. He had nothing to answer the doctor. He himself would have given a lot to know the truth about himself. One of the nurses gave the patient a temporary name, Arthur. He reminded her very much of her nephew, whose name was Arthur. The boy agreed. Arthur, so Arthur, what difference does it make? But he felt he really had some other name, and hoped that someday he would be remembered after all. When Bill got a little stronger, the doctor advised him to take a walk around town. He assured him that if he saw something familiar, it could be a trigger for the return of his memory. The boy obediently wandered through the crowded, wide streets and greedily looked around. But nothing the local houses, squares, and parks evoked any response. They seemed utterly alien and unfamiliar. And then it was time for Bill to be discharged from the hospital, because he had already made a full recovery. He couldn't be kept in the hospital any longer. So where am I supposed to go? The boy asked the doctor. A social shelter. You can still get a job. People live there for up to 6 months. Then we'll see. Maybe someone will turn up. Just don't give up looking. Bill spent 6 months in a social shelter, worked at the local sawmill, made new friends and comrades. Everyone supported the guy, tried to help him find his relatives. They gave announcements and leaflets on the streets, and so people were interviewed. But these measures still had no results. Bill decided to live in the conditions that fate offered him. He got a job as a janitor, and the Housing and Utilities Department gave him a small, cramped room under the stairs. But the guy had enough space. He worked on someone else's documents. He had none of his own. Bill accepted this life. He even started to like it. A free tramp with no past. Still, sometimes Bill would jump up at night in bed from some vague, disturbing dreams. He'd wake up in a sweat and couldn't remember what he'd just dreamed. But he knew it had something to do with the past. There was a small television set in Bill's den. The guy liked to watch the news in the evenings, but sometimes he also watched soap operas. It made it easier to fall asleep. And then one day it happened under the New Year's Eve, the TV screen suddenly went interference. This often happened. The guy began to spin the antenna at random and caught an unfamiliar channel. News of some other city. He was about to switch over, but suddenly a statue caught his attention. A journalist was broadcasting something about traffic jams blocking traffic in the city. She was standing near the fountain, and Bill realized that he had seen the statue of a boy with a toy bear in his hands standing in the center of the fountain many times. Immediately, memories began to come, scraps of vivid, realistic scenes. Here he is, 8 years old, running with his friends along the bottom of the fountain around this very boy with the bear. They are collecting coins that they managed to throw here for luck. Passers-by shout and argue, will they have enough for ice cream? He's about 18. Next to him is a woman. She has such a kind, dear face. Mom is Mom. The person who always supported him in everything. How could he forget her? Flashes of memories flashed with dizzying speed. The boy remembered everything: his name, his address, his hobbies, his whole life before the hospital. And the moment of the landslide, too. Then his eyes suddenly went black. Bill realized he was losing consciousness. The thought flashed through his mind, what if I forget again? It didn't. Bill woke up on the cold floor. He sat up, looked around. He remembered everything. The boy knew who he was and where he came from. And now there wasn't a second to wait. I went to the police and told them everything Bill recalled, looking off into the distance. Everyone listened with bated breath. Even Deborah, who already knew the story. They sent a request, then called my mother to identify me, he continued. Of course I recognized him, Deborah interjected. Deep down, I always knew this moment would come. So I wasn't surprised. In fact, I was glad. How did you get so far away from here? How did you get to that town? One of Bill's friends asked. The current must have swept me right into the river. That's what saved me, Bill answered. I was unconscious, but by some miracle I didn't drown. The current carried me many kilometers ahead. Somewhere out there I washed ashore. Local fishermen found me, called the police and an ambulance. That's how it all came together. So they sent out an APB on you in a completely different neighborhood, said the girl thoughtfully. Is that why they didn't find you? Bill nodded, and then suddenly his face lit up with a wide smile which Sarah had already taken a liking to. Well, why are you sitting so glum? The main thing is that everything ended well. The rest of the evening went wonderfully. Everyone talked, laughed, recalled funny incidents from Bill's past. He told the audience about his former life. According to him, it seemed that the guy had had an easy and pleasant life even then. But Sarah realized that it was certainly not easy. Bill is an easygoing, cheerful person. Such people never complain and do not portray themselves as victims, but find the bright side in everything. Sarah suddenly realized that she was trying to catch Bill's gaze. When their eyes met, it was like a warm wave washed over her. She liked everything about this man, his appearance, his demeanor, and his voice. Sarah tried to keep her eyes on the handsome guy, but she couldn't help it. She could only hope that it was not noticeable to the others, who fortunately were very much engaged in the conversation. As darkness fell, it was time to leave. Bill suddenly volunteered to walk Sarah to a cab. Deborah had given her some goodies, pies, pancakes, even pilaf in a casserole dish. She always did that, thinking that Sarah didn't eat anything alone. That's why she was so thin. It's a magically beautiful evening, Bill remarked when he and Sarah were on the porch. The girl agreed with him. The moon, which had come out from behind the clouds, turned the snowdrifts into frozen sculptures that had come down the hill. Yes, Sarah nodded and added, it's warm, it's nice. I don't even want to go home. Maybe you don't have to. Bill squinted slyly. I suggest we take a walk in the park. See how beautifully it's always decorated for New Year's Eve. I haven't seen it in a long time. I'd like to see it. Are you in? I'm in, Sarah answered. A quiet joy rose in her heart. She was so reluctant to leave Bill, and now he offered to continue the evening. The guy confidently took the girl by the hand and led her towards the park. He cheerfully told about his memories connected with this place. But Sarah almost did not listen. Her ears were pounding. Her heart was racing. Her cheeks burned like flames. She marveled at the effect this man had on her. This had never happened to her before. Bill looked risky, free, and natural. He walked as if nothing had happened, held Sarah's hand, and seemed to notice nothing special. He continued to tell her something, pointing one way or the other. Sarah wanted this moment to last forever, her palm in his, him by her side. But Bill was spotted by some guys she knew. They came up to him, barraged him with questions. He let go of Sarah's hand to say hello to his buddies. And then a girl appeared out of nowhere, a very pretty girl, tall, slender, with long blonde hair poking out from under a hat. She threw herself around Bill's neck. He picked her up easily, whirled her around. The girl suddenly kissed him right in front of everyone. Bill looked at her with joyful admiration and did not let go. I guess I'll be going, said Sarah. The magic of the evening was irretrievably lost because of that beauty in the soft blue coat. So graceful and perfect, like a goddess. And Bill's looking at her. There's something between them. Maybe she was his girlfriend before all this happened to him. Why? Bill looked at her with surprise and regret. Sarah was very excited that night, Bill said. The evening is just beginning. I'll introduce you to everyone here. You're going to love it. Sarah got ready and started to call a cab since she had to be early for work tomorrow. Her friends walked Sarah to the car. Bill was holding the hand of a beautiful girl in a blue coat named Emma. Sarah realized that she and Bill had once gone to school together. At home, Sarah took a warm bath to calm down. But it didn't help. She still couldn't find her place, pacing from corner to corner, remembering the episodes of that amazing and so long evening. She tried to make sense of her feelings for Bill. He had clearly caught her eye at first sight. Was it really love? After the sad story with Ben, Sarah had tried to avoid even a hint of romance. She'd gotten burned too badly back then. And then she remembered the episode with Emma. She couldn't stop thinking about it. And when Bill took Emma's hand, Sarah's eyes swam. The situation with Emma had caused Sarah unexpected pain. She was still reeling, imagining Bill and Emma together and speculating, trying to figure out who they were to each other. Obviously there was, or had been something between them before. Or will there be in the future? Sarah didn't sleep a wink until almost morning and then made the decision not to think about Bill anymore, not to dream about him, not to make plans. He was no match for her. So smart and handsome and manly. Not everyone could handle what this guy had to endure. Who is she? No, Bill's more suited to a girl like Emma. That's something we have to accept. Deborah and Sarah decided not to go to her place for the time being. She was afraid of meeting Bill. She missed the old lady and often called her, but refused invitations to come over, citing busyness. And so it was in fact at work, hot time, reports, inspections. No time to visit. Deborah sometimes said something about Bill while talking to Sarah on the phone. The guy was back at university and decided to finish his studies by correspondence, because he got a job and started his own business at the same time. He lost so much time and now he's trying to make up for it, Deborah shared with Sarah. Her voice was clearly proud of her son. He was always so active, and now he's just not at all. I hardly ever see him at home. He's out and about. That's good. That's great. I still can't believe I finally found my son. If you can't come to me, I'll come visit you. I miss you tonight. I'll bring you some pies because I know you. You probably don't eat anything there. Sarah always enjoyed Deborah's visits. She was used to sharing all her worries and joys with her. But now she couldn't tell her loved one about the most important thing, because Deborah was Bill's mother. And yet Sarah met with the guy a few more times. He'd pick up her mother when she stayed late at Sarah's house. He'd come into the room with a smile on his face, and it would become cheerful. The house was filled with a special energy, which Sarah felt almost physically. Bill joked with Sarah, asked her a couple of non-committal phrases. He was good at keeping a casual conversation going. He was interested in the girl's affairs and occasionally said something about himself. Sarah tried desperately to glean from his stories and Deborah's words whether Bill was seeing Emma, but it was impossible to understand. On a lovely May evening, Sarah was coming home from work. She felt light and peaceful. The sight of nature awakening always had a calming effect on the girl. Besides, tomorrow was a day off, and all the reports were already turned in. She could relax and unwind. At the entrance of the dormitory, Sarah noticed Bill's car. Her heart raced, as it always did when she met this man. The guy had already seen her and got out of the car. He stood with his elbows resting on the bumpers, smiling as always. Strange, why was he here? Hi, said Bill. He pulled up alongside him. Girl, hello. I don't have Deborah. Is something wrong? I'm not here to see her. Who was it for? You, of course. What did Sarah feel? Electric pulses running through her body. He said, to you, meaning her, Sarah, me? Automatically, the girl asked again. Yes, Bill's smile grew even wider and warmer, or something. You have such a surprised look on your face, as if some star had come to see me, not me. Well, it's not every day you come to see me either, Sarah smiled back. She tried her best not to show her joy at seeing her boyfriend. He had come to see her, the two of them alone, with no one else around. Decided it was time to have a serious talk, Bill said suddenly. He'd been meaning to for a long time. Do you have time? Does she have time for Bill? She always does. Sarah nodded affirmatively. Good. Then get in. I'll take you to a very nice place. The girl gladly settled into the front passenger seat. Bill drove her through the evening city and, as always, told her something and joked. Sarah felt really happy at this moment. He's there for her. They are going somewhere. It doesn't matter where. And most importantly, there is a warmth and sympathy coming from Bill. He looks at her in that special way. Sarah's heart occasionally sank with a sweet premonition, but she forbade herself to hope there was no telling what Bill wanted to talk to her about. Could it have anything to do with Deborah? And here she was, daydreaming. Bill drove the car down the suburban highway. On both sides of the road were fields, crops, bushes, and hills. It all looked fantastic in the setting sun. Sarah enjoyed the view and didn't ask any questions. She was having a great time as it was. Finally, Bill parked the car on the curb, got out of the salon, gallantly opened the door in front of Sarah, and extended his hand to her. The scents of stepped grasses warmed by the sun during the day fell on the girl. "Let's climb that hill," Bill said, pointing with his hand. They climbed the hill, and Sarah's mind was swarming with questions. But she realized that Bill would explain everything himself. She didn't want to disturb the silence with her irrepressible curiosity. Soon they were at the top. "I wanted to show you this beauty," the boy said. "Look around." Sarah was breathtakingly surprised by the view. The city was visible from the hill, the blue of the distance in a light haze. Beautiful, big, unfamiliar from this angle. It was beautiful and breathtaking. "Knew you'd appreciate it," Bill said with a smile, looking at the girl. "Thank you. It really is an incredible sight. If we wait until dark, it'll be even more beautiful. The lights will come on. It's beyond description. I often come here to reflect, to relax, but to be alone. This is my place. Now it's yours, too." Sarah realized that Bill was about to say something important. He looked determined. "Sarah, I want to be as honest and straightforward with you as possible," he began. "So you should know that I've been thinking about you ever since we first met." This confession made the girl dizzy and gave her goosebumps. "What happened to me, that story, taught me how to be a good judge of character," Bill went on. "I saw at once what a wonderful person you are. Trustworthy, kind, and sincere. Not just a beautiful girl, but special. Unique. There's no one else like you. And I would very much like to be near you, to protect you, to help you in this life, to see every day your wonderful eyes and kind smile. If you're such a good judge of people," Sarah finally pulled herself together and looked directly into her companion's eyes, "then you must have noticed how I feel about you." "I can feel it," Bill agreed. "But I need to be sure, and that's why I'm having this conversation." "I'm glad you decided to do it," Sarah smiled. Bill understood. He came closer and put his arm around Sarah's shoulders. They stood like that for a long, long time, smiling, silent, alone in the whole world, and looked at the city, which gradually decorated itself with bright running lights.